I'd like to go ahead and call the Monona Grove School District Board of Education meeting to order. Has there been a declaration of public notice?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Joyce. Moving right along here to public appearances. There were a couple of public appearances that was on here last month that we will not read. So the ones that we will read would be John Williams, Richard Wood, Sam Taylor, and I believe Sue Carr. So I will start with John Williams, and if anyone wants to pick up for Sue Carr, Richard Wood, and Sam Taylor, I would appreciate it. So I will go ahead with the public appearances. This is from John Williams, the president of the Village of Cottage Grove Board. Dear Andrew, it is my understanding that the Monona Grove School Board will be considering the School Resource Officer SRO agreement at your next meeting to be held on later this evening. As Village President of Cottage Grove, and with the support of the Village Board, I would like to extend our support for SRO role in our Monona Grove schools. The SRO role primary focus is the safety of students and staff, but in our district, I believe they also are a key stakeholder in making valuable connections with students and staff beyond the surface. It is these connections that I witnessed in reviewing the SRO reports, talking to parents, students, and school staff over the last few years. The district can certainly sort through and adjust safety protocols and plans without the SRO role, but to lose the countless valuable connections made each day without this key role would be a tragedy. Again, thank you for the consideration, and please pass along this support to the rest of the board for the approval of the SRO agreement. Best regards, John Williams, President, Village of Cottage Grove. Thank you, John.
And I'm not sure we all got all of those, because some of the names you listed, I don't have emails from, so you might have to.
The next one is Sue Carr's. The next one is Sue Carr's, right, Andrew?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Read that.
Everything is on board docs as well.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'm looking at the emails. Thank you, Joyce.
I didn't see him earlier.
Okay. All right, this letter is from Sue Carr of 4209 Winnequa Road. First of all, a huge thank you to Dan and all of the admin folks for the hard work going on at the beginning of this crazy year. It is so appreciated. Once again, I'd like to reinforce my opposition to the renewal of the contract of the SROs in our district until a full reevaluation is done of the position description and what exactly our schools need in terms of an SRO. I was initially concerned about the issue in terms of the students of color and the potential issues that recent events that have occurred in our community as well as across the nation have brought to light. But I have now listened in on the conversations in 2 school board meetings in which this topic was discussed, and have since been equally concerned about the financial expenditure as well as the lack of oversight of this program. The descriptions of the types of things that our police officers have been doing in schools has struck me as overwhelmingly administrative, and many of the comments made by board members and staff members have spoken how well liked the officers are. I don't doubt that they are lovely people, but that is not the issue facing our district. The issues in front of you are all simple. First, do the violent incidents in our middle and high schools warrant the amount of money that is being put forth by the district? If no, then the program needs to be rethought. Could the Fund 80 money be used, as was suggested by one board member, for mental health professionals or nurses? Second, is the need for a law enforcement presence in our schools so great that students, especially students of color, feel uncomfortable or unwelcome? If yes, then in the spirit of the inclusive anti-racist work that all educators have been doing over the last few months, the program needs to be rethought. Thank you for your time, Sue Carr.
Anyone take another one?
I'll take, well, I guess I'd like to comment too. I'd be happy to take whoever was next, but that we did have three people, Maggie Brickerman, Molly Groupie, and Amelia Spate, who wrote, and actually Sam Taylor also wrote a statement last time. I'm just, we've never, and Amelia wrote a shorter statement this time. I'm just pausing because I'm not sure that we've ever made the decision that, I mean, if people wanted these read twice, I guess I'm thinking we should read them twice, but that's just my thought, but.
Well, I don't have a problem reading them twice. If they submitted them, that means it's important. Their board meetings were apart from each other, so I don't have a problem with it.
I
That's
agree.
what I was thinking, but.
And because we haven't looked at them, they may be different comments and have different perspectives.
Well,
It's kind of like them coming twice to a board meeting. They
In
would
some
still
cases-
get to speak.
yeah, in some
right?
cases, they're actually saying they're resubmitting the same
It
comments.
resubmitted, says that.
They are
that
resubmitting them, so they are wanting them to be considered again. So I don't have a problem reading all of them, but I'll read who is your next name? Are we reading them in order? I would read
Yeah,
Richard Wood.
yes.
Okay. He writes, Dear Monona Grove School Board, recently this board passed a resolution asking for a $3.7 million referendum to the November 3, 2020 ballot. This would be the third referendum in what, 6 years? I would submit the question, what does the mill rate need to be enough? With the financial upheaval of these troubling times, this board chooses to request more funding. Families are working hard to balance their own budgets and their children's needs. Increasing property taxes will be harmful to the district's citizens and businesses. Whether one owns or rents, the cost of housing will go up along with the price for local goods. Here you are in this virtual meeting making sweeping decisions from your basement and maybe buying all your needs from out-of-state internet vendors. This will have real impacts on the district's citizens, especially those in the lower income scale and the local stores. The party line is children will suffer if we do not get more money. That sounds like bullying to me. Instead of using the current situation as a teaching moment, the board is making it a profit-taking moment. You really do not think folks are watching. Plus, the survey results used to justify this referendum were tilted. Eliminate the participants that work for this or a neighboring school district and the results are quite different. I was at that meeting and saw the results chart. Further, you will probably show your lack of fiscal responsibility and send out double mailers to all the households in the district to sell the referendum as a good idea. When you do, make the header say, we cannot lead by example, so you get to pay more. As a taxing authority, this board acts irresponsibly. When spending other people's money, you should be more frugal, not less. Maybe this roll of the dice should come up snake eyes. Lastly, since the charter you operate under is based in the state and federal constitutions, each of your meetings should start with the Pledge of Allegiance so you publicly state that you recognize the republic for which we stand and the law that allows this board to exist. Richard Wood. And with that, I would just like to comment, because that's on, most of these are on the SRO. This is obviously a different topic. I just want to make it clear again that if we don't have a specific agenda item related, we don't discuss in depth the comments made in public appearances, which I believe is the case for this. But anyway, just make that comment. Okay.
Which is next, Andrew?
Next one would be, since we have no problem going over, we'll go ahead with Amelia Spate.
All right, I'll read that one. This is from Amelia Spate, 4209 Winnequa Road in Monona. Hello, Monona Grove School Board. I was greatly encouraged by your most recent discussions about the MG's SRO contracts. I have strong hope that you will not renew the contract and will instead continue to discuss ways in which we can ensure that all money over which you are stewards is used for the greatest, most equitable good. Thank you for listening to the research, the data, and the community, all of which has shown that SROs are not beneficial to all students' growth or comfort at school. Thank you for voting to end MG's relationship between police officers and students. Amelia Spate, class of 2013.
Okay. I can take Maggie and David Brickerman. members of the school board. Our feelings are just as strong as they were a month ago, so I am simply resubmitting my comments again in advance for tomorrow's meeting. Thank you once again for your consideration of this important issues. Maggie and David Brickerman, 4421 Oak Court in Monona, unequivocally support the MG School Board ending the practice of having SROs in Monona Grove schools. Research shows that holding all other things equal, the presence of the SROs in the schools leads to more arrests. In other words, SROs play a direct role in the school to prison pipeline, which disproportionately impacts students of color. SROs are couched in terms of, I think this is coached in terms of safety, but the question is safety for whom? Surely not for Black and brown students. Funds spent on SROs should be reallocated to other support services for students that will allow us to truly say that all students are safe in school. We urge the MGSB to center the voices of students and families of color in determining how those funds could best be reallocated. Thank you for your attention to this critical matter and for your public service as members of the school board. Thank you, Maggie and David Brickerman.
I'll do another one if you want. I could do Sukar.
Okay.
And before I do this, I just want to add that because I made that comment about the fact that we don't address comments that aren't on the agenda, that is because of open meetings law, that we have to have on the agenda a topic in order to engage in discussion on it. So it's not because we don't want to talk about it. I just wanted to make that clear. All right.
Susan,
Stop.
I think
Yes.
Sukar's has already been read.
Peter read that one already.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
It's
Molly-
Well, I was
Molly
looking for
Groupie
my
is
other
next.
emails. So
yeah,
the next
Molly
one
Groupie.
would be Molly Groupie. Okay, got it. Thank you. Resubmitting my comments in advance of tomorrow's meeting. Thank you again so much for soliciting and collecting this input. Because she said it so well, I'm guessing to reiterate below, I'm going to reiterate below the comments read SROs that my friend Maggie Brickerman submitted for public comment earlier today. Also following her lead, I'd like to thank you and the board for taking the time to compile, share, and consider these comments at tonight's meeting. As an elected official and a public special educator, I am well aware of the significant expenditure of time and energy that comes in tandem with public service and leadership. I extend my gratitude to all. Molly Groupie, 4910 Shore Acres Road, Monona, unequivocally supports the school board, the MG School Board, ending the practice of hosting SROs in the Monona Grove schools. Research shows that holding all other things equal, the presence of SROs in schools leads to more arrests. In other words, SROs play a direct role in the school to prison pipeline, which disproportionately impacts students of color. SROs are couched in terms of safety, but the question is safety for whom? Surely not for Black and brown students. Funds spent on SROs should be reallocated to alternative support services for students that will allow our community to say that all students are truly safe in school. I urge the MGST board to center the voices of students and family of color in determining how those funds could best be reallocated. Thank you for your attention to this critical matter and for your public service as members of the school board. So she's quoting there. Thank you, Molly.
Okay, last one is Sam Taylor. Did anyone want to take that, or I can go
I
ahead?
can read that,
I could-
Andrew.
Okay.
Okay,
No.
go in there, Elizabeth. Way to go.
I'll take my turn. This is from Sam Taylor, Monona Grove class of 15, 1009 East Johnson Street, Madison, Wisconsin, 53703. Good evening. My name is Sam Taylor, and I'm a proud alum of Monona Grove, class of 2015. Clearly, public health and the well-being of our students is at the forefront of our minds. Though I know the board and many leaders in the community are taking the right and necessary precautions to combat the spread of COVID-19, now is also the time to take the proper steps to combat another public health crisis that has for too long been ignored, that of racist and harmful structures within our institutions that negatively impact the safety and well-being of our BIPOC students. One proactive step this board can take in this fight for a just and equitable learning environment is to not renew your contract with the Monona and Cottage Grove Police Departments and remove SROs from our schools. We must listen to our young people of color when they tell us that cops do not make them feel safe at school. We must hear the call of trusted institutions like the ACLU and NAACP when they advocate for police-free schools. In doing so, we can open a new door to more equitable support systems that nurture students' mental and physical health and empower their futures rather than maintaining an environment that creates anxiety, mistrust, and potentially limits their opportunities for growth and learning. Although it may not be as salient of a health crisis as the current pandemic, we must protect the mental and physical health and well-being of our BIPOC students against racism and racist structures as we do against COVID-19. So I urge you not to renew your contract with the Monona and Cottage Grove Police Departments and redirect Fund 80 towards something that supports the entire community in more equitable ways. Thank you for taking time to read this. Stay well, Sam Taylor.
Right. All right. Thank you for those public appearances.
Can I also mention that well, never mind, that's correspondence. Never mind. We're good. Sorry,
All right.
I'm clearly not with the program tonight.
All right. We're going to have to slow you down a little bit there, Susan Fox. Slow down. Okay. All right. Moving to consent agenda. I have a motion for the consent
I
agenda.
move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
All
Second.
right. Yes, Peter, then Susan Fox second. Any questions?
Andrew, I got a question.
Go ahead, Eric.
Deanne, I just had a question about this. Do we have a shortage of special ed teachers? Is that something that we're struggling with as a district?
Not a shortage, no. I mean, as far as filling positions, I guess it's definitely one of the shortage areas. But as far as having all staff positions filled, we do have them all filled.
We have them all filled, but are some on emergency licenses?
Yes, I'm aware of at least one.
Okay, that's I was just wondering, just trying to figure out what the market was like. All right, that's my only question.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call state by saying aye. Susan Manning.
Aye.
Andrew McKinney. Aye. Elizabeth.
Aye.
Eric.
Aye.
Susan Fox.
Aye.
Lorraine.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Motion carries. Next up is recognition.
Okay, we do have a few recognitions this evening. First, I'd like to mention that our device and materials pickup ran very smoothly and efficiently, with every family able to get a device and materials before or during the first week of school. Thank you to our families and to the teachers and staff who worked incredibly hard to kick off the year virtually in a positive and engaging way for our students. And we also have some photos linked for you. A few teachers were recently featured in the Herald Independent during the first week of school, teaching from their classrooms. Again, we have some links where you can click on the arrows at the top of the photo box, how to scroll through the pictures. And our tech department has been incredibly busy preparing iPads and Chromebooks for our students, as well as laptops and other devices for teachers and staff. This team was also crucial in the rollout of the learning management systems and responsible for troubleshooting internet outages, hardware problems, and software issues. They've acted with patience, care, professionalism, and dedication to our families and staff. On top of that, they've done this while navigating a leadership change and department transfer. A huge thank you to our technology services team, Jeff DeWolf, Jeff DeCrow, Tina Heisman, and Elizabeth Alakas, who are led by our new technology services coordinator, Casey Einiken, and under the direction of Director of Instruction, Lisa Hype. So again, they have done an unbelievably incredible job, and thank you very much to that team.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Dan. Moving to correspondence.
Can I just add just a couple of things? One of our teacher resignations tonight was Chris Tudor, who was a PE instructor, but he also helped coach and did a lot of assistance on the football team, and had great relationships with the kids. And every single resignation should be recognized. And I always try and look at the list and do that. So I wanted to make sure that we kind of said goodbye to Chris, because he's been really a wonderful person to have with us. I just wanted to mention that. And Dan, I don't know, it's more of a moment of sadness, but we did lose a student in the last 2 weeks, and they had just moved out of town. So many families didn't know about it, but our neighborhood did. And I called Joyce, and Krista was on it right away. So that's been a moment of sadness. And so I just wanted to mention those things. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan, for mentioning that. I used to work with the father at American Family, so thank you. All right, moving to correspondence, seeing none there.
Actually, Andrew,
Yeah,
that's where I want to just mention one on the subject of the SRO, that we all did get an email from Melissa Radcliffe, who's a village board member and also the Dane County Supervisor for Cottage Grove. And she did not request that hers be read under public appearances, but I thought since we read the others, we should mention that she emailed in favor of keeping the SRO out of a lot of the concerns that have already been cited. So I won't read it because she didn't request that, but
okay,
just to mention.
thanks, Susan.
Mhm.
Well, and
Okay.
maybe I had planned to talk about it, mention it in the SRO, but I also received a correspondence from a parent who of a young Black woman who had ended up getting great, incredible support from the SRO at the high school as she went through many different experiences during her high school. And her mother is a social worker, so she understands the different things that people in these communities do and the work that they do. And she truly valued this experience and wanted to let me know about it, but she wasn't comfortable contacting all the other board members. So I'll put that also in as a piece of correspondence.
Okay, thank you, Susan. All right, moving to administrative reports. So we'll go to the principal report.
Okay, so we'd like to report out to the board tonight and give you an update on how our first 2 weeks of virtual learning has been going. And there's no one better to report directly to you than our principals, who are dealing firsthand with working with our staff and our students and our families. And so we do have a few slides to go through and to kind of give you an overview of the work that has been going on. And then we'll certainly leave time at the end for questions that you might have for any members of our group. So I'm going to go ahead and take over the screen here and share the slides as we move along. Try to get the correct screen here. Oops.
And Dan, are those posted?
They are, yeah. So the slides that we're going to go through are on board docs.
Okay, great, thank you.
Oh. I apologize. I'm maybe in the wrong screen here. All right, does that show the opening slide?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll just kick us off here as a little bit of an introduction, then we'll turn it over to our team. So Without question, the first week we had a few challenges to work through, but also many, many celebrations as well. So to give us, to look at kind of the summary here of what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to have our principals and administrators go through talk about our learning management systems, how we're dealing with what our attendance and student engagement has looked like. As you can read, advisories, morning meetings, and so on. So with that, Casey Einiken, our technology coordinator, is going to kick us off and talk a little bit about our learning management systems.
Yeah, so we have two learning management systems in place. We have Seesaw and Canvas. In Seesaw, we're using with 4K through 5th grade. 4K through 2nd graders are using it on iPads, and then 3rd through 5th is using it on Chromebooks. And Seesaw allows students to engage with their material as an activity. They're able to record videos and draw on the screens and record their learning in different ways. And then parents are also able to see the work that's turned in. It allows for easy access to communicate with all of the teachers as well. And then Canvas is new this year, and that's being used at our middle and high school, and kind of replacing Google Classroom. And the reason we made that shift to Canvas is that it allows teachers to have better organization for the content and provide some consistency for where students can expect to find their learning. And also it allows for students to engage with material in a different way, similar to Seesaw, where it allows for files to be uploaded. Students can record videos right in Canvas and things like that. So that's just kind of a quick overview of the two learning management systems.
Dan, you are on mute.
So the next is attendance and student engagement. That's something that myself and Angie will go over. At first, I wanna go back and highlight that we are very lucky and fortunate as a district to have moved to one-to-one devices early on. So I know it was noted. Can you hear me? I'm just making sure that my volume is up. That we were able to get a device into every single student's hand. And we have been working through any connectivity issues, hotspots, and we worked very hard this summer for our virtual 2.0 planning phases through the summer, as well as our rollout. And so that all, I feel like, contributed to the success that we're going to see with our first week in attendance. And that first week in attendance, as you can see here, Monona Grove High School, 97% attendance, 99% contact. At Glacial Drumlin School, 99% attendance. And then at the elementary, 99% attendance.
So the other piece that I think is playing a large role in our attendance and engagement is the planning that took place for this virtual learning, and the amount of synchronous learning opportunities that the students have with staff plays a huge part in how often the kids get to see each other and the kids get to see their teachers. They're looking forward to that time together. And so that has been a huge motivator for these really great attendance numbers to start our virtual learning experience. So we're keeping track of their participation both in those synchronous sessions, and then also keeping track of the amount of work that they are submitting either through Canvas and or Seesaw, depending on the grade level. We have had some connectivity issues, and so we are being flexible with that attendance as well, in terms of when parents are reaching out and saying, hey, we're having troubles. We are definitely still in contact with them and working with families in that way.
So next is advisories and morning meetings. So this year in particular, we have dabbled more into creating systems that are going to support virtual learning 2.0. And in the high school, middle school and high school, they have adopted advisories. They've already established them. We are now just making sure that they're a little bit more tight and structured. Elementary school, we are being very thoughtful with their morning meetings. So before I get started on the morning meetings for elementary, I'll share that aspect, and then Shelby is going to share for the middle and high school. But for elementary, specifically Cottage Grove, we definitely couldn't have done it without Beth Schifferdecker and Peg Zisman. They together collaboratively created the morning meeting lessons, and it's phenomenal. I mean, it's well thought out, well planned. It makes sure that it hits the SELs for students. It's super engaging and fun. And so that work we couldn't have done without that lift. At Taylor Prairie, and specifically, they did a really great job with collaborating within their grade level teams to work on specifically what those morning meetings will look like. They have included throughout their lessons teaching tolerance standards and identity work, which is very thoughtful. And I think that across the board, elementary school principals together, even with Miss Fassel, sorry, Angie, I'm like butchering your name because I'm super nervous. But we've all together collaborated really well on how our morning meetings will be structured and ran. And so I'm super confident that throughout 3 buildings, we are all hitting our SELs and teaching tolerance standards, which is really exciting to hear. So the students are super engaged in the lessons. They're implementing their virtual learning expectations, which not gonna lie, I was a little nervous about to see how first and second graders would particularly do with just like the expectations for being on virtual learning. But students are muting their mics. They're being present to learn. They're having their own workstations. Their cameras are on. They have collaborated with their teacher as far as norms of their virtual learning classroom. And one part that I really appreciate is that each administrator and student services team member were able to do rotations. And so every day I'm able to attend a morning meeting and to see kids interact with them and have conversations that are really meaningful, and also introduce myself and get to know the students better. And so I know often student services may get left out of the picture when we think about morning meetings. However, I'm really super proud of all the elementary schools together being very thoughtful of including student services and administration and all staff into morning meetings. So it really is a hands-on approach and a lot of awesome people involved with the planning process of it. But the elementary school has really done a great job with collaborating with each other on an administration level, but also implementation of the morning meetings on our staff level.
And I'll talk about the middle and high school level. At the middle level, the advisories are daily and really focused on building community and connection and having students connect with each other. And it's a mixture of SEL and social justice and ACP lessons during that advisory time at the middle level, and that's including MG21. In addition, the GDS and MG21 have also held individual student meetings with their parent or guardian and their advisory teacher, and these have been 100% attendance, and the feedback from students and families around these individual learning partnership meetings has been amazing, and really providing that connection, making sure we're addressing any needs or learning barriers during that meeting as we go forward. At the high school level, the advisories are once per week, and they're also focused on building connection and community, in addition to navigating Canvas for the first time for those high school students, and then also learning expectations and norms as well.
All right, coming into the school year, there was a lot of talk about synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. And so we actually use the following 2 slides to, for staff, we use them as kind of a springboard for talking and sharing ideas in small groups. And for students, we use the 2 slides we provided them for that first advisory lesson. So as staff talked about synchronous and asynchronous learning, students had a visual and some examples of what that might look like. I think Connie's going to talk us through the synchronous learning opportunities a little bit.
Can you go back 1 slide, Dan? Thank
There
you. So the synchronous learning is probably the biggest change that we've had this year. Last year we did a lot of asynchronous, which is more of a video type learning. And this year we went to more where it's interactive between teachers and their students. And so that was the piece I think that was really missing. And you don't have maybe the total engagement. And I'd say this year that has been such a lovely change. So some of the different ways that synchronous learning can happen, you heard a little bit about build community and relationships, and that's huge. That part of starting out your day, learning about the routine for the day, the expectations. For the elementary, it's kind of knowing like, when do you pop back on the screen to be part of the learning process? There certainly is an opportunity during the teacher-student interaction for a teacher to model. So I do, then the students do, or we do it together, and then the students are released to do it on their own. So it's a great process to really show and have kids engage in the learning. To differentiate instruction for small groups, all of our students at the elementary are in an A, B, C, or D group. And so that means they would come and join their teacher for a small group instructional period. And we're trying to keep those groups fairly consistent right now so that families know when that time is. And at some point, those groups may change, but definitely having that a more one-on-one or 1 to 5 group ratio for a teacher and students so they can get more of that personalized interaction. Which again is the personalized instruction. For some of our students, they may meet one-on-one with a teacher or a special ed teacher or a therapist for therapy. So those are definitely happening. Guide, practice, and application, certainly there's more feedback that can be given to students and helping them to learn something and then to go ahead and apply it to real life learning. Real life conversations, that's the beauty of having the interaction where the teachers and students can have interactions, which again was something that we didn't have last year. Foster collaboration among students, and I'd say that's probably more something that Mitch, they may be doing at the high school. At our elementary, that's a little bit harder right now. It's hard enough for kids sometimes to find the link of where to go. So as they get more used to being online, that may happen differently. And then I think the real beauty is that there is real time feedback related to the work that they're doing, that coaching to help students move along with their learning.
I would just add, in terms of synchronous at the high school, students are meeting with their teachers every period that they're assigned, and it's at the beginning of the period so that it's predictable. As you can see here, and like Connie talked about, there's a lot of creative ways to structure that synchronous time. And so it may not be a straight half-hour chunk that's used at the high school. It might be a 5-minute check-in and set the lesson up, and then students are released for some asynchronous learning, and then they come back together toward the end of that 90-minute period for more synchronous time. And so you'll see staff members chunking that a little bit differently and experimenting with what's working best for each lesson. We can move to the asynchronous piece now then. And the asynchronous learning takes place really anytime students are away from that logged in synchronous time where they're live with their teacher and they're with their classmates. And as I said on the prior slide, some of this could take place during that 90-minute block, and I'm talking specifically about the high school now. Some of this asynchronous may take place during that 90-minute block. They're just not all live face-to-face and on their Google Meet. Some of it may be assigned after that class period, and students are required to complete that work before meeting the next day. Teachers are also using Screencastify or Screencast-O-Matic to videotape lessons or direct instruction, send that out with a lesson then or task to be completed by students on their own. So those tasks, as you see from the choices here, a lot of creative tasks and uses of asynchronous learning that are at teachers' fingertips. And we use this slide as I said, just as a kind of a springboard for staff to look at and start talking about ideas for structuring lessons.
And I just want to add that all of the core lessons that at the elementary are definitely a video-based instruction. So there might be what we'd call like a mini lesson, which has the core components of a learning target, the activities, and then the success criteria. So students know like what it is that they need to do. So that way, if a student was not able to be part of the synchronous learning, they always can have access to the lesson online.
Thanks for bringing that up, Connie, because that's the same point of emphasis at the high school, that students should be able to matriculate through the course, have exposure to all the key content and skills through the asynchronous lessons in the case they're not able to join synchronously.
All right, for this portion, the related arts portion, we're excited that actually all our schools have the opportunity to include related arts in their schedule. That's different for 2.0. We're proud of who we have in those positions as teachers. They do a wonderful job. And we know that's a super important part of the educational experience with the related arts. And we use that term related arts at the elementary level. I know they use encore and different terms for middle and high school. The exciting thing is at the elementary level, we have in the schedule, Phy-Ed, art and music and strings are all included in the student's weekly schedule. And so like in the spring, it was more optional. And now we feel it's totally infused into their school day and feels more like a school day. And you already heard about the ideas between synchronous and asynchronous. And so it is a combination of synchronous time with students and then asynchronous. The neat thing is they're super creative. So they were actually able to put together some supplies for students to bring home. Our teacher put together a booklet, basically an art journal that they could go through and use throughout their lessons. I know at a couple other elementaries, students are being creative, making balls out of tin foil or frisbees out of plates. One school sent home a low bounce tennis ball. And of course, there's just lots and lots of ways that they're being creative with delivering related arts for our students.
I would just piggyback on what Reed said from the high school perspective. These folks have thought long and hard about how they can engage students and reach students in courses that traditionally require materials and demonstrations and hands-on. And we have our materials going home at the high school level this week. Student pickup is going on all week. And we had art packets with clay, art metals, materials, musical instruments, sheet music, all kinds of great stuff going home. And I know PE is also has a checkout cycle for equipment that they're developing. So definitely being creative and finding ways to engage students and keep them moving forward in their areas of interest.
Okay, so that's the overview of our virtual learning 2.0. And so now's an opportunity for board members to ask questions of any of our team members that are with us here this evening.
I have a question, Dan. First of all, I want to thank all the teachers for, during these times for adjusting and doing the online learning. I also want to thank all the principals and administrators because I know how much work that has gone into this. My question is for all the principals. The first question is, are we making sure that our teachers have enough support, particularly with technology issues, learning issues? I don't know if anybody's got feedback on that. I want to make sure that somebody is supporting our teachers when these things come up, because I know they're coming up. So.
Yeah, I mean, I can go first. I mean, there's a thing about, we talk about technology. I mean, there's almost a daily email about another tech tip or a supportive way. Casey's team is incredibly awesome at being there. They send out updates. I can drive by Cottage Grove School at 7, 8 o'clock at night, bringing one of my kids home from a practice and such. And our tech person's car is still there. They're going above and beyond with support there. The other thing is how we build our teams in that collaborative environment. So that Wednesday, when they get opportunities to meet together on collaborative teams, there's just so much shared expertise that they're there for one another. I also know, talking with our principals, that we don't take the wellness side of what we do lightly. And so offering up opportunities for folks just to get together and have a cup of coffee in this form, just to talk, is something we've tried. We also open up meetings and things, thinking about ways that people can stay balanced during this work. But yeah, there's really firm structures, but then there's also those personal side structures that we want to support the excellent work that our teachers are doing. I know we're super proud of what they're doing.
And has the feedback generally been good from teachers as far as like interaction with their students? I know the attendance was really impressive numbers. As for instance, like if a teacher had a problem and something wasn't working, or our administrators checking in with teachers and making sure that, our teachers are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. I'm assuming that's all being done, correct? Okay. I just think it's important to, it's hard to know with so many different students and the online learning, that instant feedback from a face-to-face education model is missing. So you're relying on other unknown things, unknown territory that we're in. So I just hope that we continue to work on that, because I know we can, even do a little bit better than what we're doing, I hope.
I'll just add some of our discussions today during co-planning. We've been trying to at least have another person online with the teacher, just to help do some troubleshooting. Sometimes it's just simple things like, hey, your screen's not working, or a teacher's trying to fix something, and that other person can continue leading the students, in the discussion that was happening. So we've really been trying to have, whether it be an educational assistant, a reading teacher, another special ed teacher, just be part of pupil service staff, be part of the learning process, and just giving feedback too, like, hey, did you notice, X, Y, and Z was happening in the rooms or in the virtual classroom. So we are trying to really help one another that way.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and can I just follow up just a little bit with Eric's, and I really appreciate the way he put that question. We had received, the board received a letter from a parent who was really unhappy that we weren't able at this time to go into in-person, particularly for the younger classes. And he specifically stated an issue about teachers coming in late and the materials not being loaded. So I think Connie was speaking to exactly that kind of thing, that and then you worry about the teachers, again, sometimes it's, I was on a state bar meeting today that cut out 4 times. It's just connections and things, but you guys are giving them as much support as possible, with possibly a backup person supporting them in that environment. That's incredible.
To both questions, I would add from the high school, with the technical support specifically, Casey and her team have been very responsive at the high school. In addition to that, our IMC director, as well as our instructional coach, have really played an active role in supporting our staff in their move to Canvas, the LMS. And they're holding drop-in informational sessions both in the morning and the afternoons, so that people can drop in and receive that technical support. And there's been a lot of teammates leaning on each other and learning new skills from one another and tapping each other for resources, and that's been really encouraging to see. That said, it is new, and when it's new, it takes a little longer, and it can be frustrating to navigate and figure out exactly what goes where and how to maximize efficiencies. So I don't want to understate, any frustration that some folks would certainly be experiencing through that process, but we're definitely aware in trying to provide all the support we possibly can.
So Mitch, if there's a parent that we hear from, generally Dan responds to those, is very good about responding to those letters, and Andrew, as board president. Is there another person? Do you recommend the principal or someone else, if we know which building they're talking about, that you would recommend we recommend them to go to?
I'd probably defer to Dan on that question.
Okay, send them to Dan. Sometimes they're not comfortable calling the superintendent, so.
No, absolutely. And certainly, anytime there's a concern about a specific student, clearly, working with that teacher or the principal in the building, is the most important thing. So that's generally what I'll try to do is involve, someone from the school. But the most important thing is they get a connection with someone that can help.
I think most of the time principals become aware of the concerns if it's in their building. I wouldn't imagine that we don't.
Peter?
What are the lessons of the first week? What do we think we can do better, and what are deficiencies, and how are we going to work on those?
Well, I'll go. We've been finding that I'm going to speak for Cottage Grove, but there are areas in Cottage Grove that Wi-Fi is not very good. And so, we're trying to do some problem solving around how to help those students. And it tends to be more at like learning centers. So definitely we're asking families to sign up for a hotspot and trying to get those so students can, again, have access. But that's one issue like we're finding. I think it's just maybe the number of kids that are on, but some might be on and then some get dropped. So trying to figure out how to work together on that issue.
Yeah, I can speak on that because when we got 4 to 5 computers rolling in this house, and so we had to get a hotspot so we can get so we wouldn't get dropped off, because I would have been dropped off this if my kids are doing homework right now. I probably would have been dropped off if we didn't have a hotspot. So living out here in the country part, that's kind of what happened. So you guys are doing a good job of trying to get the hotspots for kids who don't have access. Lorraine had a question, and then Susan Fox.
I actually had a couple of questions. The first one was about small group lessons. So does Canvas and/or Seesaw allow for like small breakout rooms so that students can do small lessons?
So right now, Google Meet does allow for breakout rooms if students go through and use a nickname, and so that's how we would be using our breakout rooms right now.
Great. The next question I have is around attendance. So how do you go about taking attendance? Do students have a certain amount of time to log in for you to take attendance?
I think it's different at elementary. I'll speak to the elementary piece. So because it can be synchronous, can count as a participation for that day, as well as completing activities. We ask our teachers at the end of the day to take attendance, so that if the teachers have seen them at all that day, or the students have completed any activities during that day, they take attendance in Infinite Campus like we would normally. We also at the elementary level know a lot of our families have daycare situations, and so some are doing work in the evening hours. So at that point, then teachers are looking at the work the next day and saying, you know, this student completed their assignments from yesterday. They're emailing our attendance clerical staff and having that attendance then changed. And especially in these beginning days, those who had some connectivity issues at the beginning or right at the start ended up going back and doing a whole bunch of activities. And then we counted them present for all of those days as well. So we're doing our best to look at their work and then changing it as they have completed activities. I know it's different at the secondary. That's how it's kind of working at the elementary.
Well, I know at GDS is pretty similar to what you just explained, Angie.
Okay.
We give time for the family. Usually teachers, and again, we've been very clear with teachers, we don't want them working at 9 o'clock at night to see if any kids have finished any work up until about 4 o'clock. And then we don't log it in the system until the next day, so the teacher has time to look back at any assignments that were completed and turned in. And then that is when our attendance clerk will call or reach out to the family. So it's very similar to what Angie was talking about at GDS.
Okay, Susan Fox.
Oh, I think Mitch didn't
Oh,
share.
yeah.
Sure, we can go attendance at the high school. So our conversations leading up to deciding how we would take attendance at the high school, there are a couple factors. One, really the data point that we wanted that to represent and the clarity around that. And then two, how much time we wanted to spend going back and trying to figure out who accessed what or turned what in, the day after or 2 days after. And I couched that with the fact that this is not a punitive mark if the student was absent that day. It's not, there's not a consequence for it. We're not coming down on that student. In fact, if that data point surfaces, we're looking at how can we support the student and check in and make sure that they're engaging with the asynchronous learning and making their way through the curriculum. So what we do at the high school, if a student is present for part of the synchronous learning, they're marked present. If there's an assignment in that particular class and they turn it in before the end of the school day at 4 p.m., then they're marked present. So if they turn something in at midnight that night for that class and they weren't there synchronously that day, then they're not marked present that day. But if they do show up for the synchronous part, they are marked present. So what that tells us data-wise is the student was either present or they turned in their work that day for that class, and that's as clean as we could get. And that will help our data team as we look at data, provide support for students that we're seeing are not engaging, in that synchronous learning time on a regular basis, and figure out why that is and how we can make sure that they're still moving forward.
That's great that you all provide a lot of flexibility for attendance. I just had one last question, and that's regarding special ed or students with special needs. What supports are in place for those students?
I suppose I can take this one. For those that don't know me, I'm Sean Bielmeyer. I'm taking in lieu of Krista while she's on maternity leave. This is me. Sorry. I was having a little trouble with my camera there for a second.
Yeah, I'll jump in here real quick, Sean. I apologize.
sorry.
I meant to introduce you a little bit later, but perfect timing. So, and obviously we're thrilled that Krista had a healthy baby last week. And so Sean is our interim student services director who's been with us for the last month in preparation here. So, but that, sorry, Sean, go ahead.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. Allowed me to get settled real quick. So the supports that we currently have in place are, we're constantly looking at the IEPs and looking at what are the ways that we can ensure that what is written in their IEP is able to be provided virtually. When we think that we cannot provide those services virtually, we first are trying to exhaust all options to see if there's ways we can be creative to ensure that we are meeting those minutes. In the very rare cases where we believe that we cannot support it virtually or in a different manner, then we are holding IEP meetings and we are reevaluating what sort of additional services can be provided to ensure that those meetings are, or to ensure that those minutes are being met and that the students are getting the education that they deserve. And then in very, very rare cases, we are bringing some students in for face-to-face instruction. And that is, right now, I believe we have about 8 to 10 students slotted. And we started with about 3 students this week. And so we're evaluating throughout the semester, but we definitely want to try and keep it as limited as possible. Obviously trying to make sure that we are meeting our requirements legally, but also with safety at the forefront of our mind.
Thank you.
Specifically at the high school for that, Lorraine, the schedule that we stuck with helped because our co-planning model stayed alive in this scheduling model. So our specialists are still meeting with our teams to plan ahead of time what those lessons can look like and the differentiation scaffolds that need to be there. So that's still alive. And on top of that, specialists are now able to meet regularly with departments when they meet on Wednesday because we have that afternoon time where they can meet and plan as well. And so that's embedded maybe a little bit better even in this model. We're also keeping our resource centers open. We're running those at the high school. So we have students who are assigned there and students can also access those resource centers. And the other piece I would say for all students would be the office hours that can be accessed to get direct support from teachers.
Thank you.
Well, my question was, most of it was about attendance. And so thank you for those thorough answers. It's really helpful to have a better understanding. I noticed for the high school, and I didn't see this for the other schools, that 99% contact was made also, meaning a couple of kids there hadn't been. I assume we're following up on that, but I guess I'm wondering what we're doing. I'd like to be assured that we will in fact make contact soon with everyone if we haven't at this point. Can you say anything about that, or? I mean, 99% attendance is good, but when there still seems to be not 100% contact, I just wondering what's happening with that.
I can speak to the middle school that we're always meeting in meetings with our teachers and finding out, what kids are in, what kids are not, synchronous or asynchronous, what assignments are turned in, and then who we have not set up advisory contacts with families. And then we've expanded that to include our student services and then our family engagement specialist, Mr. Johnson, and all of our resources that we have to make contact with the family. And it really is to look at, is there anything going on? Is there something that we can support the family with, and how can we support them through? And what are the things that the family may need at this time that we can support with? So at the middle school, yes, our goal is always to make 100% contact and set up at least a family meeting with the families. And so we may be at 99% in the middle school, but we're always striving. If it's not 100%, it's not good enough.
I think at the elementary level, just to piggyback on what James said, part of the attendance is not to be compliance based or, punitive with it. So then the reason where you take attendance is to see like who's getting on and how often are students on and work completion, all those other elements. That gives you the idea of who we need to contact and problem solve. And teachers are really, really on top of that. And so there's layers of that. First they try, then they maybe involve student services, and next they may involve myself or Danielle. But that's really one part. It kind of goes hand in hand with when we talk about attendance, because it's so important to make contact with families. And let's face it, families, there's a lot of different scenarios that families are dealing with when it comes to virtual 2.0. And so that we learn how to be to meet those needs, because there's a lot of different ways to do that.
Right.
And I can speak a little bit to that too, in terms of some of our social workers really reaching out to those families that may have not been on synchronous learning times. And I would say, I think I know 3 or 4 families that have just moved out of the district. And so that's why there was no contact.
That makes sense.
We also have, as Reed said, there's layers to it, Susan, and at the high school, after teachers and individuals try, we have our data team and we have our student support teams that meet every other week. So data team is tomorrow. We'll look at behavior, attendance, grade reports, and just make sure that no one has slipped through the cracks, and that anyone that still needs support is on someone's radar, and they are assigned and reaching out to help and figure out what's going on.
Okay, thanks. And then I wondered if some of the connectivity issues, if some of those are with the platforms themselves. Do we have a sense of that? Just in reading what's happening nationally, I keep reading about all these different platforms just crashing, and I'm just wondering whether we know whether those programs, whether their staff are also working on whatever bugs there might be or issues, or is this all internet connections? And did you have a sense of that? I guess, Casey, do you have any thought on?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely working through it. It does seem like we are having more issues with the Chromebook connections as opposed to the iPad. So we're looking at it as being a hardware issue.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that come through a little, yeah.
Yeah, and we're also in contact with other districts in the area, and they're having the same issues across different platforms. So it's not necessarily directly a Meet or Zoom issue. And so definitely reaching out, and there just hasn't been any quick fixes just yet.
Okay, well, I have been impressed with how quickly you've gotten on those, just in seeing the emails that go by. So thank you for all your work.
The ever so patient Elizabeth.
You just like to save me to the end because I always have a list of questions and they get gradually crossed off as my board colleagues speak. So hi, everybody. Surprising nobody that sits in meetings with me every month. I have a list of questions, but I always start, for those of you who are not used to my orientation to the board, with things that I've noticed that I think are really, really great and worth acknowledging. And so I echo what everyone's saying in terms of just how much gratitude I have for how much work you've been putting in, and also all the teachers and staff. I think I'm in a position where I have a line of sight over lots of different reopening things that are happening around the world, in the country, in the state, or whatever. And I think that there is a level of intentionality and planning with our reopening that's been happening over the last 2 weeks that really is top notch. And so I cannot thank you enough for that. And then on a personal note, I think many of you know my son entered kindergarten this year. So this was his first experience. And like you said, I cannot say enough about how welcoming and great it's been. And I think the SEL focus is very prevalent and obvious. I think the diversity, equity, and inclusion forward-facing focus is very evident and obvious, and he's pretty excited about his learning opportunity. And I think if you can kind of create that in sort of a strange space, I think that speaks volumes to the quality of your staff, and also the quality of leadership that you're all providing as principals. And so thank you for that. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that I appreciate kind of your diligence here and going through like all of the, what's happening in related arts, and always explain the difference between synchronous and asynchronous, and also the flexibility as it relates to attendance. And like always, I have a few questions. So kind of specifically as it relates to attendance, I appreciate the flexibility that's in it. I think it makes sense to have this really broad definition. It sounds like, especially Mitch, when you were talking, that kind of internally within your data teams and your teaching teams, that you really kind of break apart and tease apart that attendance, right, in terms of who's showing up for synchronous and asynchronous. I'm kind of curious at the elementary level if you're having those level of conversations too, and then to what extent maybe next month at the board meeting when we're a little bit deeper in it, if we could see more of that breakdown. I think the aggregate makes sense for where we're at right now, but sort of in the future, I think the breakdown of it would be really helpful. So those are my two questions about attendance. I guess one for principals and one for Dan.
I can go. My tier 2 PBIS team met this week, and we're trying to create like what would constitute check-in, check-out.
Okay.
So we are looking at, like, we haven't finalized anything yet, but just a discussion where we're at right now is like, if a student missed 3 days within 5, would that constitute like following up and really putting something in place to try to figure out what's going on, whether it's engagement or whatever that may be. Like, we need to reach out. We need to get that student back in. So we are having those conversations. We just don't have it fine-tuned.
Sure.
Great. So Elizabeth, can I just add, that's such an excellent question. So Connie, is your thought that at some point you might build metrics so that there might be at least some kind of standard? So if someone said to us at 2nd grade, how many absences before somebody gets in touch with the family? Are you going to do that, or what's your thought?
Well, we get in touch if we don't hear from a family that day. I mean, we still have that. Okay. So we still want parents to call in if their child is sick or if they're at a medical appointment, et cetera. I mean, to excuse their student, with the hope that someday when we come back, those policies or procedures are in place. So we do make a contact. It's our, as somebody was saying earlier, our clerical, our administrative assistant who works with attendance does make that call. But I'm just saying, if we are trying to get a hold and we're not getting a hold of people, then we're going to put something else into place.
Yeah, kind of layer in an intervention there.
We kind of had a 3-layer, like if this, then that kind of a,
Yeah.
And then Elizabeth, if it's okay, just want to explore this a little more.
Sorry, I got lost where you were at, Lisa.
Yep.
Your cube just popped up.
I know. Hi, thank you. Because there is an important difference between like attendance in terms of like that compulsory attendance versus like optimal learning, right? And what we really want to do is obviously make sure that our students are taking full advantage of what we have to offer that will enhance the virtual learning to the highest degree possible.
Yes.
And we really think that participation in synchronous adds that kind of benefit that really helps students feel like they're part of a class, that they have opportunity to engage directly with teachers and their peers. And really, again, we'll bring that learning to maybe a fuller fruition for for our students. Well, and for our staff, quite frankly, too. They love being able to see their kiddos and interact. And that sort of is a different level than, are you present or are you absent?
Right.
And so what you've heard described at first was, here's who we're seeing. And we want to kind of take every opportunity to mark a student present. We're not looking for someone to be absent.
Yeah.
So we're trying to give a really wide berth. And quite honestly, DPI gives a lot of flexibility in how you're marking attendance for that compulsory attendance part. So when you hear principals talk about that, they truly are thinking of it in 2 ways. Are you here present, or were you absent, meaning we didn't really engage with you at all? But then also, to what level are you fully engaging in the learning?
Yeah.
Does
Thank
that
you.
make sense?
Yes, that makes absolute sense, Lisa. And I appreciate your like you're pushing the thinking further there, because I think that's exactly what I'm asking for. Like, not necessarily like presence or absence, but like as we move forward in it, like if the board could see data on exactly that, sort of that the engagement indicators around sort of what's working and not working, and not necessarily the sort of really static, yes, you showed up in some way, shape, or form today, or no, you didn't. So I appreciate the push there.
Elizabeth, can I add something?
Yeah, you go for it.
So Connie and Lisa said it so well, but I think there's one thing that we can't really quantify, and that is the adaptive component. I think we often think about attendance as far as like lateral, but I know that me personally, I've been working really well with GDS as far as a vertical alignment. So the families that we share, and if there are some situations where, you know, we've noticed a kiddo at Cottage Grove School has a sibling at Taylor Prairie and a sibling at GDS, how are we together communicating and not overwhelming that family and being thoughtful? We've already had meetings. Danny Johnson has spearheaded a lot of conversations with me about how to get involved with families. And so that is another additional layer. I know attendance is very technical, but we also are working at like the why. So
yeah, no, that's fantastic. Thank you.
And how can we support?
Great. Dan, were you going to say something? I saw you come off mute before.
Yeah, I mean, and I think just to summarize, I mean, it's been stated really clear. I mean, we had a lot of conversations about that technical attendance, you know, versus, you know, the engagement. And the neat thing that I've seen, I think that it's been true a lot about the virtual. We've talked about, okay, what lessons are we learning that when we get back to our normal face-to-face that we can, you know, improve upon? And because even in when we have kids in the building, that compulsory attendance certainly does not measure engagement, and engagement is what it's all about. So we've had a lot of discussions, as Mitch talked about. We want to have data to help. It's not just about that compulsory piece, but, you know, synchronous. And when we went into it, you know, we really didn't know how many kids were going to participate that first day or first week. Actually, we were thrilled with the numbers, and I was really concerned, or we all were, especially, you know, with our younger kids that with daycare, you know, challenges and so on, were they going to be able to connect? And you know, what should there have been a higher degree of expectation for high school kids who are more independent, and how much? And so it's been awesome to see the level that we've had, but as everyone else stated, I mean, it's a real opportunity for us. The compulsory attendance is the easy part. It's the engagement and everything else. So
thanks. I really appreciate, like, this is sort of I think a richness around the data that just seeing it you don't get. And so I appreciate everyone kind of coming off mute and sharing that additional context. It's really helpful. I have more questions, but Peter, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, you know, follow right along on Dan's comments there, which is, what are the metrics that we're going to be looking at? How will I be able to tell at the end of the semester? How will I be, or this period, whatever it is, how will I be able to reassure parents that what we're doing is meeting our expectations and what we're getting is for performance? I mean, this is all new. I expect, actually, I don't know what my expectations are, but I think that we should have some way of looking at metrics and being able to make comparisons about our performance, not just because of this year, but also because going forward, I think it's important that we learn the lessons of what we can and can't do with online learning, because I think that there's a logical place for that in the future. Anyone care to answer that?
Well, Peter, I think I would just share that primarily when we're talking about engagement right now, we're really looking at how students are participating in synchronous opportunities. And then even through the asynchronous, so many of the lessons, their focus has shifted or is beginning to shift more towards that, like, transfer of learning and application of knowledge, instead of maybe just a acquisition of knowledge approach. And, you know, ultimately that's what we want, right? We want students to like do something with what they're learning. Like, that's the highest level. And so really in this remote learning situation we're in, those are some of the goals that we have for our students, is that they're able to take in information, learn some skills, and then like apply it to something. And what we're asking for ultimately, as we go through virtual learning the next 8 more weeks, is that students are applying their learning to work product that then is meaningful and important, and that they're sharing that back with us.
Did we have a way of looking at that and measuring that prior to the virtual learning?
Well, it's always through like our assignments, right? So the tasks, the learning tasks and assessments that teachers are giving, but being remote, some of those tasks are shifting is what I'm describing. And
Okay.
so, right. So that learning is looking different. So we're hoping we're going to see more emphasis on that application and transfer of knowledge, students using the knowledge to produce something, again, that's meaningful and important to the student, and that type of learning is going to really benefit students. But that's the type of learning that really is more optimal when you're in a remote situation. Sometimes we don't quite get there when we're face to face.
I think that metric might be hard to track, but surveying staff in terms of what kind of tasks they've assigned, how often they've used performance tasks versus other, and asking students what they've been asked to do certainly could uncover some of that.
I agree.
I just think at the end of the day, we do need to be able to say, well, we've been successful and this is the evidence. Somehow.
We had that discussion with our Pathfinders team when we were looking at our school improvement plan. And, it is a challenge to come up with those metrics. You have behavior, attendance, grades, obviously. But then they also put out a survey to students at our first advisory, and really trying to measure engagement and connectedness and have a baseline. And we're going to track that as we move forward as it relates to our school improvement plan. But again, knowing how important it is for kids to be connected to each other and the teacher, and then engaged with the task as well as their classmates. So the only way that we will gauge that is our survey data in terms of that particular goal.
Thank you.
Elizabeth?
I have 2 more questions, but just 2. One is actually related to something, Reed, you said a while ago around kind of just staff wellness and staff well-being, and some of the things that you've been doing to sort of intentionally build that positive culture and climate and connections. And so just curious to know, one, like, how's your staff feeling in general? I think that this is, the beginning of the year is always stressful, but this is extremely stressful and high stakes in a much bigger way. And then if you could talk at the buildings around what your strategies are in ensuring that staff are feeling well and connected both with each other and also personally kind of finding the balance that they need with their like home lives as well.
Yeah, I think you just to echo what you said, just recognizing the beginning of the school year never is a piece of cake or a breeze. You have 430 youngsters join your school for the first week. It's pretty intense. So there is that notion too that, we've been able to, they tackle a lot that first week, regardless of, students in the building or this virtual land. I think just to know, we should share, like our first week back, all the principals really adjusted the plan coming back with teachers before the students arrived. There's a lot more time for folks to plan, a lot more time for people to feel balanced versus meeting after meeting and professional development after professional development. So you start there, right? So you can talk all you want about it, but if you don't do anything action-wise, that doesn't matter. And then just simply creating space, I think, is always important. Danielle and I were able to just have, we call it coffee with we just do it on before they start instruction. They can just sit down, they just join us on a meeting like this, and we don't talk about school really. It's just about how's everybody doing and what have you. And so we've tried that. This is just about Cottage Grove schools, of course, but then additionally, we have people that we hire people that believe in this. So I give roles to John Hagan, Amanda upperclassmen. So our coordinator meeting yesterday, John presents the opener instead of like, how's everybody doing around the horn? It was partner up, go to a breakout room and talk about this wellness bingo sheet. So it's just talking about all different ways that maybe you have comparison with the person you're talking to, or maybe this sparks an idea.
Sure.
Then what do the teachers do? And the coordinator, oh my gosh, let's make one of these for our young people, for the kids. So then they take it to the next level. And so those are some of the ways. But it's also our job is to continually to take a pulse. And so talking to our coordinators on how their teams are doing, and then what else they may need, time or just a voice, then you got to make sure that you're hitting those spots too.
Great. Thanks, Reed.
I think the only thing I would add, I agree with all of that. I think it's a constant adjustment. We're having 2 shorter staff meetings a month to allow for more often checking in with staff and everybody seeing each other. We've shared a lot of tips. I think there's been a lot, even in the business world, not just school world, if you are home and your computer's at home, it's like that constant draw, right? And so just sharing tips of like, how are you making sure that you're leaving it and making your time for your family, and making sure that we support them in making those decisions to take care of themselves so that they can make the time for their family. So we've been pretty purposeful, I think, about making sure that they know that.
Thanks.
I can speak to a part where I've heard from staff.
Yeah, great.
That staff have actually shared that that they are thankful that the district moved towards trusting them as professionals to do the job that we want them to do in the way that are flexible enough for them as professionals. And many staff members, because I'm in the building a lot, will walk by and just say, thank you, this is awesome that you're allowing us to do this. We know that other places are not, and they wouldn't know how it would feel not being treated as a professional. And they feel like in our district, they're being treated as professionals. And that I think the term she used was, I'm optimistically overwhelmed, but I feel supported. And so the key word in that is that, optimism, overwhelmed, so we know, and then that they feel supported, and that we continue to do what we can to support them. And some of the ways that we found was sometimes, a lot of times I'm or Chris or someone in the building is in these meetings with them, learning Seesaw and Canvas alongside them. So they see that the struggle is real, that we are also doing our best to understand the questions as they arise, as we engage with the system. So that was some feedback that I received from staff to you all.
Thanks for sharing that with us. That's great, I think. And I think anytime you can hear both hope and optimism in a time of extreme uncertainty and angst, it's a good thing. All right, I have one more question, and then I will yield the rest of my time to School Board President Andrew McKinney. It's around parent engagement and sort of what our parent engagement strategy kind of has been thus far, and then what lessons have been learned and moving forward. And my question is not just kind of broadly around family engagement, but really specifically around, how do I want to say? So like I'm educated, right? So like I understand kind of the classroom setup, and like Mitch, when you talk about like, okay, so, a teacher's going to come on and, teach about a thing, and then they're going to let go for independent learning, and then they're going to wrap back up. I can imagine that is actually a really similar setup to what happens in a classroom, right? I do my lesson, I walk around, I check on my kids as they do independent work, and then I come back. But I think for folks that don't necessarily know that, what it feels like is my teacher popped in for 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then they went somewhere else, right? And then they came back maybe, right? And so I think my question really specifically around family engagement is, because the learning looks different and because parents have line of sight and visibility in a way that's different than they ever have before, kind of what are our strategies? And I say are really collectively as a district, because I really feel like family and community engagement is a collective responsibility of all of us, right? What are our kind of tasks to do here around ensuring that families really understand what's happening and also feel like they have a sense and a say and kind of, yes, this makes sense to me, even though it feels a little bit different than what I would kind of expect because my kid's usually in class from 7 to 3 or whatever. Does that question make sense? Kind of the specificity around it? So anybody who has thoughts there around family engagement, specifically around kind of learning at this time?
I think your question makes sense, definitely. I mean, in terms of the importance of opening that communication and making sure families understand, what that learning might look like, the synchronous, asynchronous, at the different levels, because they may have kids at different levels too. And so that may vary. Ideas for that, I guess I'm gonna have to think a little bit more about that at the high school and how to do outreach and other than the traditional methods with our parent council, which reaches some, but may not be as wide reaching as what we want.
Can I just ask a question kind of related? In that time period when students are working on their own work, is there a way they can indicate if they have a question, if they're having struggles with something? Because in other words, is the teacher be checking in on individual kids, or what's going on in that period when the kids are working, when normally the teacher would be in the classroom and probably circulating, and if a small group or individuals are having questions, they can be answered at that time. And I can see how that might raise frustration if that availability is not there. And I don't know how these platforms work, whether it's possible to set that up so that, like here, we can all kind of disappear and go be working, but still have our computer on, and we could pop back in and ask a question if we wanted to get. Does that work with Canvas? Is that at all how this is working now, or?
Yeah, that can work with. Well, they're using Google Meets, and so it can work with Google Meets. Our instructional coach actually just sent out a great graphic. I think it was earlier this week, and it had 4 choices that students could use the nickname for, and the 4 choices were, varying levels of support or interaction that they wanted. So I just want to work independently and quietly. I want to work, and I'm gonna have questions for my classmates. I'm going to work, and I would like the teacher to stop in, occasionally, and I'm going to work, and I want the teacher there a lot, kind of thing. So it's like they could pick one of those 4 to go off and work in. And that was one model that she sent out. That was a suggestion. But in general, yeah, the teacher would be available during that release time, asynchronous, and then if they're coming back for the synchronous learning at the end. Yeah. Again, I would also coach that, Susan, with just the newness for everyone, right? And experimenting with the best lesson structure that works for the content and skill that we're trying to teach.
Right, that makes sense. Thanks.
And then, so Dan, with everything that was discussed, with all the questions that the board had, and what all the principals are working on, will you be getting a weekly report?
That's a good question. I guess I haven't determined what the best way is. Certainly, we don't want to necessarily wait another 4 weeks until you get information. So at a minimum, in the normal written memos, updates, and then we'll have to think about perhaps other, ways as we move along here. So definitely, yeah, we'll have to work through that together about the best way of communicating.
Okay, because like just comparing 1 week to the next week to the next week, and you get those reports, and you could probably share it to the board so we can have a better understanding of what's going on too. And if we could put some input in or help out in any way, because again, we have to help, the admin and the teachers and the community and the kids. So anything that could help us out that we can help out as well, be appreciated.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, Andrew. And I think, I mean, looking at, and we've spent quite a bit of time together tonight, but not only is it an opportunity for you guys as board members, I'm learning as well. I mean, there's only so much time that we have. We have weekly meetings, and so I think, without question, I expect that, I know our teachers are going to adapt and learn to continually to, improve and from each and so on. So yeah, I think there'll be plenty to be able to share out as we move along here.
Okay.
Well, Andrew, I fully support that. And it makes it much easier because we're out in the community as well. So if we have some understanding that weekly, instead of next month, we're going to get information similar to the basic information that we got on the PowerPoint. Minimally, that would be incredibly helpful. And again, one sentence from the principals about how they feel the engagement is going. The two things being the attendance and then the engagement, the learning piece. Otherwise, we're out of the loop.
What I'll do is I'll work with Dan. We'll talk about it in a day or two, and we'll just discuss and see how we can keep the board abreast on.
And then would you let us know kind of what you decide so we know what to expect or not expect? That would be great.
Yep, I will.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Was there any more questions or concerns with the principals? All right. The greatest principals in the world, with Lisa Height running the ship and Sean. All right. We'll move on to Superintendent's report.
Okay, so yeah, let me begin by thanking again our team tonight. I think, as you hear, we're really proud of the work that they're doing, and so we'll continue to move on. All right, so what I would like to share tonight is kind of set up about, okay, what about the next steps and preparing, beyond our virtual instruction and for our face-to-face opportunities. So as you heard tonight, this team, along with our teachers, the amount of the time and effort input into really trying to have the best virtual learning experience as possible has really been, this last month and a half and into these first 2 weeks of school. So as far as what are we doing then to pick up where we left off this summer about preparing for students to enter the building. So I just put a couple links on board docs for you. I think you've already seen these before, but just so you have access, we're continually updating our webpage with information. But then with regard to the public health, orders as well. So right now, our focus is on all the procedural and the protocols that we have to have in place. Part of the order is about when students return. Okay, how do we have all of our hygiene protocols in place? What about if we do have an outbreak? Do we have isolation rooms and so on? So public health has done a great job about laying all that out for us about what needs to be in place. And so right now, when the rest of the team is really focusing on the virtual learning, our student services team, our school nurses are preparing that and continuing that work. So you heard Sean speak briefly a little bit, some of the students that we are seeing face-to-face, some of our students with disabilities, well, we have protocols that we've had to put in place before those students enter the building. And so we're able to utilize that now and expand upon that about, okay, what about when we have more students? And so our staff have all been trained on what the rules are for each other and physical distancing. Now we then have to train them about, okay, what are the rules with students? And so that's the current work, is getting those protocols in place, and that will be, we're in a good place with that. I mean, all the work that we've done thus far is just kind of tying up the loose ends and putting in the right documentation and having that ready to go. And then learning, as well, again, from the face-to-face opportunities we have with those small number of students. And so I do expect that, we didn't put a specific timeline about when is that final plan done. We said that we want to commit to, or at this point for that first quarter to give some parents some certainty. One of our biggest concerns, and there might not be anything we can do about it, is that we get students back and then we have to shut down again. And we know as much of this has been really taxing on a lot of our parents, at least they know where we're at right now. And then that whole back and forth thing, again, it may be unavoidable, but that's one of the concerns about, okay, having that plan and really back to the parent engagement, that was talked about in the communication, so they understand what is happening. So really that will be these next few weeks is pulling this all together for the student return. And then obviously the board will be part of that discussion about, okay, when we feel, okay, here's the plan that we have, that we, not only the safety part, but the educational part about, that this is really going to optimize, if we end up having to have, students in cohorts and, in small groups of students, let's not do it just to say we're doing it and get them in the building, but how is that going to improve our learning, for students over what we have right now? So, like I said, I have a lot of stuff I put on there from public health just to keep you up to date. I guess the last thing I'll comment on, and then I'll take any questions that you have. With regard to the school metrics, this was really important that we learned from public health last week. We all saw what the threshold is in order to open schools for the different grade bands. But then the question about what about them closing school? And we were glad to hear that it's not an automatic closure when those number of positive cases hits that threshold, because it hit it last week. With UW opening last week, that threshold for average cases was 55.6, which was above the 54 for opening K2. But they're not closing the K2 at this point. And what they're going to do is not, when that happens, is look at an assessment. Why did it hit that? And in this case, it's clearly because of what's happening in near campus that they feel does not have an impact on our public schools. But they also give an example, I think, put in here about, could be other reasons, a long-term care facility or so on. So, again, public health is going to continue to be in regular contact with us and that decision making. But all we need to do is, okay, we have certainly a duty to follow the regulations, but more importantly, what about how we're going to, the plan for when those kids are in place. So I'll stop there. And I said, take any questions about the planning process, about next steps moving forward.
I have a question. Dan, just to kind of go back about our timeline, when we voted to adopt the plan, that was for the first quarter, correct? And the first quarter ends when?
The first week in November.
The first week in November.
Yeah.
What if the numbers do go down to, and I'm being optimistic here because that's how everybody should be. And we do kind of get this under control and our rolling, average drops. Is it possible to come back to the board to reopen sooner? Let's say if they're looking really good, the numbers look really good and we can hit that K2 number. How does that happen? How does it work?
Sure. Yeah. And so first of all, the answer is yes. We're not, tied to any particular time frame. We put the first quarter in there to give, again, the parents some idea of planning purposes. But I do think, I haven't heard any indication from public health that they're going to get to the point where they're going to, we can bring students in K2 now with the restrictions that are in place. As far as would they loosen those restrictions so we can have more kids and not require the 6 foot, physical distancing, I think that's highly unlikely. But if that happened, well, of course, that makes it a lot easier for us then to bring kids into school. And why wouldn't we? So we definitely will be prepared if they loosen the restrictions. Sure, we'll get those kids in quicker. Right now, we're preparing for it with those restrictions in place, getting the kids in.
And then will you come back to the board with a request and another plan if we get to that point and it looks like those numbers are looking good to ask us to approve a reopening plan or some type of plan that's different than what we have?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, I just had a question for you, Dan, around as far as like training and stuff, especially around like COVID prevention, suppression. Are we getting support at all from either Dane County Public Health to help support training our teachers or state health officials in order to do that? Or is that something that we're sort of responsible for doing ourselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say in general, yes, we're getting some support. I think we have to provide our own training. They're not going to send out, people to do it for us. But as far as providing the information that we need to share with our teachers, they've been very good. Public health in particular has been very good, about that. So I think, again, our school nurses will play a large role in providing that training. But I think they are getting a lot of really good resources from public health and DPI, for that matter too.
Good. And I just I agree with you, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness around really being careful that reopening is an enhancement, because I'm in the camp of feeling like rolling closures will be more disruptive both to families and to learnings than not. And so I think that, being really clear about what we can do, making sure everything's in place and making sure that it's an enhancement before we bring kids back, and so that we can buffer rolling closures to the extent that we can, I think makes a lot of sense.
Susan Manning, you're on mute.
Thanks. So Dan, I know you've done a lot of study. It's just that we've gotten a lot of questions about not going back on the 4K2. And could you just, for anybody that's watching tonight that may not have really gotten a feeling that question's been answered, could you just give us a few of your thoughts about that?
Sure. Yeah, and so to be clear, the initial requirements that were in the order from public health at the end of July were, if you're going to have kids return to school, here are the conditions and, the requirements for physical distancing and so on. And so those were the rules that we were under when we determined, we just are not going to be ready to have kids back under those conditions. And then what happened in the latest order, they're saying those rules still apply for K2, but in addition, 312 is off the board completely, no kids. So that's why nothing has changed with that decision at the end of July. We're still under the same rules for K2 as we were then. And that's why we're still planning ahead. Now, we're continuing to plan for 3.5 and 6.12, as well, hoping that those will come back online also. But that's where we're at this point. Now, there has been, to that point, I've received a number of questions as well, what about what the other schools are doing? And so, yes, we are continually, I still have weekly meetings with all the Dane County superintendents. We're all well aware of exactly what everyone is doing. So there are 2 schools in Dane County and in our, group that have brought kids back already. Verona had a plan even before the 312 closure that they were going to bring back the K2 students. And they're doing it in cohort models and, for half days. And Wanakee was the other school. And Wanakee had to adjust their plan because they were going to try for K4. Now they had to reduce it to K2. And so, yeah, we're absolutely watching really closely about how things are going for them and what can we learn, with our own planning. And then all the other schools are in the same situation as us, and they're all at different places as far as what that timeline is about when they're going to try to return or consider that. So there are a couple schools that made the same as us with the first quarter. A couple others picked a date like in mid-October, a couple weeks earlier. And so we're all in the same places working forward and sharing our plans.
So Dan, what would you need to do to bring back 4K2 that we aren't able to do right now? I think that's the question we get, that if you could add the clarity for that, that would be just great.
Sure. So the one thing is the protocols. That's the easiest piece is finalizing those pieces about, the hygiene protocols, the isolation rooms and what have, all that sort of piece. The biggest challenge right now is how to effectively do our teaching and learning. because if we bring kids in cohort models, we can have X number of kids in, a room at a time, but we're asking our teachers to teach those kids face to face as well as the kids who aren't in the building virtually. And that's what we're trying to figure out, is what is the best way to do that effectively and with what's reasonable, to ask of our teachers. That is the biggest challenge that we're all facing right now, is how to balance the face-to-face with the virtual instruction.
Well, thank you. That's perfect. That's exactly what it's helpful to have you say so the public can hear that. Thank you very much.
Can you
Lorraine?
add, oh, sorry.
Lorraine?
I think Susan was next, so you can go.
Oh, was it?
I just
All right. Yeah.
I was following up on Dan's comment that Verona and Wanakee are doing this, dividing the cohorts in half, classes in half. And I'm just wondering, is that what they're doing? Are they bringing in half of the kids like Monday, Tuesday, doing the cleaning Wednesday, bringing the other half Thursday, Friday, and then the teachers are responsible for also virtual for everybody all week? Or what? Do you know what the programs look like? I'm just.
Yeah, and Lisa, I know, is also in communication with all the directors in the county as well about their plans. And so, and Lisa, correct me if I have this wrong, but I believe that is the model that Wanakee is using, similar to what we were looking with that hybrid model. Verona has a little bit different model. They're having, instead of splitting by days, they're going half days. So kids are AM or PM. And so, it's the same idea in cohorts, just dividing up the days a little bit differently.
Cleaning in between, I assume.
Yeah.
Right,
Lorraine?
If students do come back, how does transportation play a role in this?
Yeah, great question. So we are in the same restrictions as far as having to have distancing on the buses. And again, Jared has been spending a lot of time on this. And so clearly we're going to have far less students that can be on the bus. They'll need to have one to seat every other seat unless they're with a family member. So one of the things that I think that we're finding with the schools that did open is a lot of parents are choosing to transport their own students. That'll be extremely helpful if that happens. Otherwise, we're talking about, additional routes, to get the kids there. So Jared, is there anything to expand upon that?
Nope, that covers it. Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Moving on to board reports. Teaching Learning Equity Committee, Eric?
Teaching Learning Equity Committee met and decided our calendar. Our next meeting is going to be September 22nd at 4:30 p.m. And then we also we have been working on an equity statement. Are we going to go over that later, Dan? The equity statement, is that right?
Yes, it is up for, later on the agenda.
So we finalized that equity statement and recommendation of the board, which we'll be going over later. And we are kind of going to focus this year on the virtual learning and the equity piece and the learning piece of those two things. So our first meeting is September 22nd for this school year.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Eric. Personnel Committee, Susan Fox.
All right. The Personnel Committee met September 2nd and talked about the school nutrition situation, which will come up on the agenda tonight. And we reached consensus in support of the administrative recommendation on that. And then we also talked about additives. The question, because of the WIA ruling, that they're hoping that the fall sports will be played in the spring. And if that's the case, those coaches, obviously will be paid for their coaching responsibilities whenever those contests actually take place. All of our teachers who have additives are being encouraged to be creative and find ways to keep kids involved with, and the forensics, for example, at the high school, that those competitions will continue virtually. So that was a little easier for the staff person in charge to know that they're still performing their job. In other areas, it's a little more difficult. So we're kind of waiting to see how that plays out, and just encouraging people to try to, if they, to the extent that they can, work with those student groups to continue doing that as just an added student engagement piece, as it always is, an important addition to their growth. So those are the two things we talked about. Our next meeting date is September 21st, and that will be for an exchange of proposals with the MGEA regarding educational assistance for this year.
All right. Thank you, Susan. Next is Policy Committee. Susan Manning.
Thank you very much, Andrew. The Policy Committee met on September 2nd, 2020, and discussed two policies. The first policy is based on major changes to Title IX federal regulations that are designed to protect individuals from discrimination based on sex, and applies to educational institutions that receive federal funding. So we have to integrate these federal changes into our policies. The regulations include, so you'll understand how these policy meetings go, a new definition of sexual harassment, regulations governing sexual harassment occurring in a school's education program or activity, a definition of actual knowledge, did you know, designation of a Title IX coordinator, notice and publication requirements, requirements for a school's response to a complaint, the adoption and publishing of grievance procedures, the investigative process, determination of responsibilities, standard of evidence, appeal, informal resolution, record-keeping requirements, emergency removal provisions, and required training. So again, very challenging, and we're working hard on that. The committee also discussed Policy 5330, Administration of Medication Emergency Care, per changes from Neola and review by the nursing staff. And we approved that one, and we'll be discussing these issues in policy tonight. I'm not exactly sure how the time frame has gone, Dan, and how you want to do that. Originally, we'd planned for Nicole to talk about the Title IX policy, but we can do that when we get there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Susan. All right, we're moving to possible action items. First one is school nutrition compensation guidelines.
Okay, we have a proposal for you this evening. We did share the proposal with the Personnel Committee, as Susan noted, and if you recall last spring, when we had our initial school closure, we brought together a resolution for the board to keep all of our hourly staff, or all of our staff for that matter, whole, who were not able to work. And that was just through the emergency, the school closure from the governor's office. It expired June 30th. As we begin this new school year, we have been able to have our regular scheduled hours for all of our staff, with the exception of our school nutrition program. Just because of as much as we're offering the program, we just don't have all the hours that we're able to fill. And so we would like the board to, we are recommending that we do have a compensation guideline that will allow for those that are able to work, but we are not able to give them enough hours in order to, pay them for their regular hours. And so as far as the details of this proposal, the two people that can answer the questions best, Jared oversees the school nutrition program and works very closely with Dee Mathis, our school nutrition coordinator, on all the scheduling in the program. And then as far as the other side of it, Nicole is the one that put together the actual documentation, as far as how this would work with leave and payment and so on. So if anyone has any specific questions about this proposal, Jared and Nicole can answer them. And I guess I'll first turn to you two if there's anything you want to add. I give a very broad overview of it, but
I think probably the biggest point is with school nutrition. Obviously, we know their main job is to provide meals to our students when they're in the buildings. And when students are physically in the buildings, we do breakfast in the classroom, and then also lunch. And then there's as we all are aware, multiple lunch periods throughout the day. So we're able to do that. In addition to that, we have crews in all of our buildings. So we have the 6 buildings that each have a kitchen staff. One of the biggest challenges that we do have is obviously wanting to continue to provide meals for our families in our community now during virtual 2.0 or during this pandemic. So one of the recommendations that public health has given us, and something that we truly believe in, is that we have 4 different crews. So if one individual in one crew tests positive, we still have others that can come into work and provide our meals. So what's happening right now is we're preparing the meals out of the high school in Glacial Drumlin. So there's 2 crews at the high school and 2 crews at Glacial Drumlin. They're obviously scheduled at different times, and so they don't overlap. And so, you know, that's one of the bigger areas that it just prevents us immediately that we can't provide a full schedule for someone. So all of our kitchen managers typically work about 37.5 hours per week during the school year. You know, right now they're down to being scheduled at 18 hours because we have to divide that up. And how we created the schedule is obviously looked at, you know, prorated it based on how they would have worked normally. So if there was someone that we classified as full-time, when we looked at all the hours in the week that we needed, we made sure those individuals received a little bit more hours than someone that would have only been scheduled 3 hours a day, to keep it, you know, fair to everyone. And that's part of the reason that, you know, we are coming forward with this recommendation, is because we just don't, I mean, even though what we're doing this fall is amazing with school nutrition, being able to do 100% delivery, and in the spring we were serving about 250 meals. Next week we have orders for over 750 meals to go out per day. So it's outstanding. So as we start, we're adding more hours. So when we first started, we were looking at the first week really like 40 or 45 participants. And so then as we continue to grow the program, we're starting to see that there is more need for additional staff. So as it's a work in progress with the schedule, as we continue to find, as we continue to add more bus routes, like this week there are 10 buses in just Cottage Grove delivering food, and there's school nutrition staff that's on each of those buses. As we grow next week, I'm sure we're going to need more buses, which will require additional staff to come in. And so there's going to be a point where we'll still continue to maintain 2 crews, but it might be a crew that works in the kitchen that also does delivery, but then a crew that will come in for a couple hours that will not go into the kitchen, but just get on a bus to help with deliveries, so we can continue to make sure, because that's the worst case scenario, is that if we have an individual that tests positive and we have to shut down our kitchen, we obviously don't have a way to provide meals, even though right now we're only doing deliveries on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But if it's a Thursday and all of a sudden we can't even do the delivery and families are expecting meals, it would be, you know, as devastating as all of a sudden having to cancel school because of a COVID outbreak with students in the building.
And can I just add, the other thing to keep in mind is we certainly want to keep all these employees with us, our school nutrition people as well as our bus drivers, because we do fully hope that we'll be back in person at some point this year, and then we'd really be scrambling. So it's really important to keep our connections with all of these employees as well.
I agree. And I think it's one of the most critical jobs in general, but particularly during this time, to ensure that we have continuous meal access for our families.
And then I'm going to just add on there, Jared, that you done an excellent job on that. You know, you had me at hello, but I just want to say that there's a lot of school districts out here that have the parents to pick up these meals, but they didn't think about the ones who don't have vehicles. And for us to do 100% delivery is phenomenal. And we can be a guide and hope for other school districts that are doing this and can learn from us and do this as well, to service all of those low income families, you know, single parent homes, and the ones who don't have vehicles. So kudos to you, Jared, and the nutrition team.
Well, and Andrew, we have those stories. There was a family that had 5 children and they didn't fit in the car. So the family was having to come in and pick up meals with 2 different trips and then leave the other children at home, which of course wasn't working either. And the staff immediately met their needs. It was amazing.
So,
Okay. Susan Fox.
I'm ready to make a motion that we approve. I recommend, or we approve the 2020-2021 school nutrition compensation guidelines as presented.
Second.
All right. All in favor, starting with Susan Manning.
Aye.
Susan Fox.
Aye.
Lorraine.
Aye.
Eric.
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Andrew. Aye. Ayes have it. Motion carries. Next item is resolution authorizing temporary borrowing in an amount not to exceed $7,750,000, insurance of tax and revenue anticipation promissory notes, and participation in the PMA levy and aid anticipation notes program.
So this is our annual cash flow borrowing program. We have to participate in this due to the fact of how our finances are structured from the state of Wisconsin. Our fiscal year begins July 1st. However, our first large payment of generalization aid doesn't come until September. We still have payroll that's happening in July and August and September, but we only receive 15% of our generalization aid. And then taxes start coming in December and January, and then we start getting more payments. So school payments are typically structured to receive in the second half or the last quarter of our fiscal year. So this is our cash flow borrowing. This number is increased. We usually do about 7 million. For the time being, since we're unsure of what a budget repair bill might look like, when that could happen based on Legislative Fiscal Bureau, hopefully it's not going to now. We feel that if there was going to be a change in our finances, it would come out of our per pupil aid amount, which is a payment in March. So we did add a little additional, just try to cushion in case that happened as we try to prepare for that. But it does look like that might not be a reality right now. But we're unsure of what our finances are going to look like just with everything that's up in the air with COVID-19. So just note that it is a little increased this year due to the fact that there's the potential of a reduction in money that the district could receive.
All right. Thank you, Jared. So can I have a move to approval of the resolution authorizing temporary borrowing in an amount not to exceed $7,750,000, insurance of tax and revenue anticipation promissory notes, and participation in the PMA levy and aid anticipation notes program?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote, starting with Susan Manning.
Aye.
Susan Fox.
Aye.
Lorraine.
Aye.
Eric.
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Andrew. Aye. The ayes have it. Motion carries. Third, school resource officer agreement.
Okay, so the board has had this on the agenda for discussion for the last 2 meetings in July and August. And sorry if I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, but I'll just briefly kind of go through the process and what brings us, here to this evening. So the agreement that we've had with the city of Monona and the village of Cottage Grove, historically, we've done 3-year agreements. And so that last agreement expired on June 30th. And if we go back, about 4 or 5 months ago to last spring, At that point, we had it on our, we keep a running list of for the entire school year of all the different things that are up for, board approval and so on. And at that point, the idea was, well, let's just renew it and they'll bring it to the board in June, to renew as we have done, many times over. And obviously some things have changed, since then, and rightfully so, as far as discussions that boards are having and school districts about the use of resource officers. So that's why we haven't brought this to a vote at this point. We started with just discussion. Let's, and talk about the program and give you as a board a chance to talk about a little bit. So since our last month, I've just done a little bit of research and trying to make sure I really understood the history in the school district, as well as in Wisconsin and with regard to DPI and recommendations and so on. And so what I did find is that, in fact, it was started back in 1996 with the city of Monona. And then we added the College Grove resource officer in 2017. And it did really, back in the late 90s and 2000s is where, a lot of school districts added resource officers with the idea that would improve school safety. We've talked about that and what the intent was during that time. Even back, a little bit more than 10 years ago, I think I found some documentation from 2009 that in Wisconsin, the Department of Justice and DPI both strongly supported schools having resource officers, and with the goal of having one in every building or in every school. And it's really been then since that time that some changes occurred. And so I did put a link to the information resource page from DPI. And if you look at that, you'll see that it's not about advocating that you should have resource officers. It's more about, if you do, here are the considerations that you should have. And included with that are about having very strong memorandums of understanding about what the expectations are, and having an evaluation, a thorough evaluation of the program, and setting goals and what you're trying to accomplish. And we've talked about it, but I'll say it again. We have not followed through on that end of it. There has been no evaluation. It's been just, well, we have resource officers. We've had them for a very long time, and we have done a lot about what their role is. I think it has shifted over time, but we haven't formally, updated job descriptions or put in writing what those expectations are. And clearly, if we're going to continue to have resource officers, that's something that absolutely has to happen. And so I think when in looking at the discussion that we've had these last 2 months, I mentioned last month that it's time for me to bring forth a recommendation at this next meeting. And everything that's said has been really important and valid about, you've heard from the principals about some of the positive things about why they support having resource officers. And then there's been some concern raised about, whether intentional or not, whether it really is best, for our students and so on. And part of the discussion has been about, what do our students think, or our parents? And we've certainly heard from some, and we've had anecdotal information. We did have that discussion with our Parent Equity Council, as well. And I'll just say that we've had some parents that felt very strongly, and some of the concerns that were raised by this, some of our board members as well, that about, no, they don't support having resource officers. And we also had some parents that very much supported, having resource officers. So what I'm proposing tonight is I do think this is a really important decision, and I do think that we need to take more time, and we really do need a formal, thorough evaluation before we make a final decision. We also know that this year is unique in that our schools are currently closed. We don't know how much they'll be open, and if we, how much resource officers would even be, in our buildings this year. So what I am recommending this evening is that we simply renew the agreement for 1 year only, to give us an opportunity, with the expectation as a board that we come back with a very thorough evaluation at the end of the year for you to make a commitment one way or another, either to discontinue the program and then have a plan in place for how we can fill the gaps for the things that need to occur, or that we support continuing with, under, certain guidelines. I did include, a little bit of documentation of other considerations. This by no means is a comprehensive list, but just, a couple of thoughts that I had since our last meeting, with regard to that parent feedback. I think, knowing what our students think, what our parents think, and staff, I think is very important, but I do think we really should do an actual survey where we really do hear from all and make sure that's a valid survey. So we really are getting all perspectives, for the board to consider. The school safety plans, and now, do we have to have resource officers to have safety plans? Well, of course not. But the reality is they have been an integral part of our safety plans. And it occurred to me, last week when we had the issue in Cottage Grove where, early in the morning for our first day of school, we had a couple, armed individuals that the police were looking for. And in normal circumstances, our resource officer would be our first line of communication to the schools. It ended up working out. I did have communication with the sheriff's department. They wanted to confirm that we didn't actually have kids, in school in the area. But it just all of a sudden realized that that's another thing that we need to consider about, what is the role of our resource officers in our safety plans, and that if we weren't to have them, there are some, changes that we need to make. Again, not something that we can't do, but it's just another, thing that we need to consider that we would have to do. And then the last piece that I mentioned, the student support. So I did have some conversations over the last couple of weeks, particularly with the city of Monona. I spoke with Brian Gatto, the city administrator, to talk about it from his end, as far as, budget and assignments and so on. I had an opportunity to talk to Chief Stranga as well. And I talked to Luke Wunsch, our resource officer, a little bit about what the board has been discussing. And I had some questions for him as well that I didn't know answers to about some of the day-to-day things. One of the things, again, that we talked about is, what is the role of law enforcement for our students? And, the goal should be not to get kids into the system, is to keep them out, or if they are, to help support those students. And just, again, this is anecdotal, just, a couple of small instances, but I think important. Officer Wunsch did mention to me that he was in contact, or a couple of students, two particular students did reach out to him over the summer who had some issues, with the justice system, and looking, for guidance from him about navigating through that. So again, it's another thing that if we didn't have resource officers, can we find other ways of supporting those students? Sure, but it's just to keep in mind that we don't have those things in place right now, and we would need, to do so. So just, for some of those reasons, that's again why I landed on the recommendation of, I would just like some more time to be able to really have this a thorough, and we cover all aspects before we make this final. So that's the rationale for my recommendation. I'll stop there.
I just have a question before we kind of get to any of the motions and anything, Dan. Just to confirm the way that this is written, there is no cost to the district when the district is not in session. That includes snow days, pandemic, summer, all of that is covered on this. Am I reading that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
Elizabeth? I'll go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
I'm sorry, Eric. I thought you were done.
I was done. I'll come back later, I'm sure.
Well, I just have a clarifying question on that, Eric. So I'm glad that you asked the question about the money. I'm curious, Dan. I understand your rationale, and I don't know that I necessarily disagree with it. I guess what I don't understand is, why do we need a contract in order to do these things?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if we didn't have officers this year, could we still do the things we're talking about? Yes, we could. The reason that I would like to have the contract is so that as we work through, and while we work through what would be those kind of new supports to replace, that we would have time to put those in place. An example, we talked about the role that the officers play sometimes in when we have, I'll say, kind of crisis situations with students. And we talked about, would it be more appropriate for student services staff to help de-escalate, behaviors and so on. And that may very well be. Right now, though, that is another person that is part of the team to assist. And maybe that's not a good example, but I guess what I'm getting at is to have them available while we work through that evaluation is, I guess, what I'm
Well,
saying.
you know that's not my favorite example, but I
Yeah.
understand what you're saying in terms of like what you're wanting is like a scaffolded supports, right? So in the event that we come back, then we have as we're figuring out. So that would be why we would need a contract.
Susan Fox?
Well, I think the other point would be that, in the role that they've been in, a contract gives you an officer who is assigned to the school when school's in session. So after the virtual piece, if we do this contract, if you don't have a contract, you don't have any built-in person that you're dealing with. I don't see how it would work, frankly, without a contract. Because I think it makes it more clear who's responsible, and that person can be working on relationships. And it isn't, I guess, I know the parent Susan mentioned earlier, I think did contact other board members as well and I had a conversation with her and she spoke as a social worker about the differences between what and says as a social worker, she works with law enforcement people all the time. That's part of her job. And there are different roles. And she felt in her situation with her daughter, who is a Black student at Monona Grove, she felt that her daughter did feel comfortable and they did often engage the officer in legal questions and issues. And she also made the point, which I've also heard with other incidents, that if there is an incident, we had said that, I think one thing to back up, clearly this new, if it's an MOU at this point, if it becomes a contract at some point, it just does outline much more clearly what the role is. And I think, looking at this DPI guidelines, we have not done what they suggest right off the bat as measuring student, family, school staff, and community experience of school safety and law enforcement presence to gauge your starting place. We've heard really just anecdotal evidence from really relatively few people. When you look at our entire district, we've all done a lot of the reading. And I know I've gone back and forth on this the whole time, and I become convinced of one thing and then I become convinced of another. But then considering our own data, our own experiences, our own available data on discipline incidents, ticketing, arrests, school perceptions, giving better guidelines, that's the stuff that we really haven't done to look into what really does the community think, what do our students really think, not what are people guessing that they think, which is all I've heard so far. And I think we haven't really done our homework. I think it is a big decision. And back to the point, there is a role that law enforcement can play that's different. And I think limiting it and prescribing it more carefully is important. So I guess I'm back to kind of leaning toward thinking that we should continue this for another year and do our homework on this subject, because I think it is a big decision, and it's one that it has an impact on both the city and the village. I mean, if we say, okay, we're not going to do it this year, and then we change our minds and decide we do want it, it may not be an option, because they have different, it may cause reductions in staff, that kind of thing. I just think that I feel like, it's one thing to look nationally at what the statistics are, and I understand the prison to pipeline, the school to prison pipeline issues, and I just can't say that I've seen some of those at play in our district. I think we have to look at our own district and our own people and our own needs and find out what the situation really is, and I just don't feel like we've done that. That's kind of where I am. So I'm sort of in favor of defaulting for continuing for a year with these stricter guidelines and with reimagining and redescribing what this role really is, and then reevaluating and how useful is it really.
Eric, and then Susan Manning, and then Lorraine.
I want to bring this up now before a motion is made because although I would support SROs in our school, I would not support them based on this MOU that's written the way that it is. And I have some real specific concerns. I won't go over all of them, but I will go over some of them real briefly. And one of them is, I do not think any student should ever be removed from class and be arrested, or there should not be any disruption in learning if a student is in there and learning. That is a big problem for me, the way that this is written. If the student's in class, they can still access and get to the student after the class at a better time when they're not in front of their peers. And it's just not a good situation for any student to be in at all. There's some other things in here about administrative, contacting parents, making the best effort. I don't think that, I think the parents should be contacted, and I don't think that, I think they should be contacted before the student is put in custody with the police department. I have some problems with the investigation, with search and seizure. I would support searching, the school premises for weapons only. I would not support it for anything else that includes drugs or property. I wouldn't support the searches for that. So those are just a few of the issues I have with the way that this is written right now. So, I mean, I don't know. I know that you're presenting this to, to approve for a year so that we can work on it. I do support SROs in the schools, but not the way that this is written. I would support them much more as a role of enhancing and working with our students, not being there as an authority figure to arrest students and give them tickets. So that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't know if someone makes a motion or what the procedural point of that is, but I wanted to bring it up in case somebody that's more experienced has a way procedurally to do that. Otherwise, you know how I feel about it. So if someone wants to make that motion, that I probably wouldn't support it as it's written.
I agree with Eric.
Okay, could I think that's a really important point. So if you don't mind, I'll just kind of the procedural piece. So I'm not asking for approval of this agreement as it's written tonight. This is a draft. And so kind of going back to where did this come from? So this is basically a template that we received from our attorney. I did review it. I had some changes, but I'll be honest, I didn't go through real detail as some of the things you mentioned. I agree with some of the points you just raised there, Eric. And so this can be amended. It was shared with the city of Monona and village of Cottage Grove as a starting point, with the idea that they likely would have some feedback and we would be working on this back and forth. My hope would be to have a completed agreement to bring to the board. But where we're at right now is, even though the village and city have done their initial review, we really haven't gotten into the back and forth negotiation, because that means time and attorney's fees for them as well. So they're waiting for a commitment from our board that we even want to have SROs before they'll spend the time and work on us on modifying and getting this in final form. So that's why I'm asking tonight is, the recommended motion is authorize me to enter into not this agreement, but an agreement. And what I would like is that very specific feedback from not only Eric, but any board member for suggestions on anything in here that you'd like to see changed, because it can be changed.
Susan Manning and then Lorraine.
Dan, I really appreciate that. I think I'm kind of where Susan is, that for one thing, I really would like to hear how the students feel about this. I'd like to hear how the Scott Groff and his student group feel about this. I'd like to hear how other students feel about this. I actually, what was that, 2 years ago, when they did the school safety presentation after the shootings in the schools. And sometimes those shootings are students. So some of the younger kids who have come to me talked about how this position makes them feel safe. And some of these students don't even know Luke. So, or the other SRO out in Cottage Grove. So I would very much like to hear how students feel about this position, how the staff feels about the position, and if there are elements that we can develop that could be sustained as a positive benefit for the student. Are there trainings that we do so we can share our knowledge and be collaborative in our approaches to our students? And again, it was wonderful to have this parent provide this input. I also had a special education teacher provide input to me. She was struggling one day because she had more students than she usually had in her group. And the person going by the door that day happened to be the SRO. And she said, "Could you give me a hand?" And she said, this was one of the most incredible moments she'd ever had, because she didn't know this person. She had no collaborative relationship with them. She had no idea whether they could really help her with herself as a teacher in this environment. And she told me this story last week because she thought it was important for me to understand the feeling and what they provide in the schools. And that's what I'd like to know more about. And if we don't give this a year for us to study it and study it intensely and work on the memorandum of understanding, which is different from a contract. And I appreciate the fact that that's what you're working on. It's a memorandum of understanding, and that's exactly what it is. It's to understand what the expectations are for what you do. So if you aren't comfortable with that as a board member, you can make those changes. So I am so appreciative of the thoughts that you've brought to us tonight, that I would really like, the only way to have the opportunity to get the input on this is to do this for another year and be able to do that work. And I think it's a lot of work, and I appreciate that you want to do it.
Lorraine.
If we did put this in place, is it possible to have an oversight committee to ensure that the procedures in place are equitable?
The answer is yes, it is possible. And I've given some thought about, okay, what would this process look like as far as, the evaluation and so on. And I think it definitely is beyond me or our principals putting together a report. I think a committee of some sort makes perfect sense. And I'm very open to suggestions and, what you or board members would have with regard to that. So, yes.
One other quick question. I'm sorry, I have one more. Mental health professionals, is that something that we could possibly do, is bring on more mental health professionals to help students?
Yes, I think that's something regardless of whether we have SROs or not. I don't think the more I think about it, I don't know that necessarily have to look at it as a replacement. Now, budget is an issue, and we've talked about, Fund 80, that we have more flexibility, but it is still tax dollars, and we need to, be thoughtful about that. But so I think regardless of the SROs, I think independently, or maybe at the same part of the evaluation is, that needs assessment. What else do we need in our schools, whether it be as a replacement or in addition to?
Elizabeth?
So I appreciate that, Dan, because, to me, I feel like through our conversations and through the correspondences that we've had, I think, to me, there's a clear and compelling need around more staff to have connection with our kids and more support as it relates to mental health and well-being. And I have talked a lot at this point around how that is not the function of a police officer. It's just not, right? It's not criticism. It's just their different job roles and job functions. And so I am not convinced that the SRO meets our actual need, right? Which to me feels very clear and very compelling. However, I think if the board really feels strongly about taking time to study the issue from a very local perspective, I'm in support of that. I think the more that you can learn is always the better. What I'm not convinced about, what I can't understand why we need to, is why we need to be in formal agreement with the police department in order for us to do our own study about how this works or doesn't work for us. Like, that's the leap I can't make. And I recognize that, like, it's hard to let something go that you've had since 1997. I recognize that, like, there's like some perceptions around what a loss around that may be or whatever else, but I can't quite get to why we need to be in formal agreement in order to do all of these other great work that we're talking about in terms of real, deep, meaningful, equitable community, staff, family, student engagement.
Susan Manny.
Those are really, really great questions. And I think if you look back, part of it is because now I'm old. If you look back on the agreements that we've had with other groups, and I think a perfect example is Will Nimmo with the media group. So we actually have a contract with the city in the provision of all the services that Will does for us. And if you start counting up, he does an amazing amount of stuff for us. It's more, and that's why the memorandum of understanding is better wording than a contract. And that is ultimately who's responsible for this person, but when they're on our grounds, we are evaluating them at all times. And that's why I think that memorandum has to be so clear. And that's why I think to work on that with your input and Eric's input would be incredibly helpful. And again, I totally agree on the mental health issue. And I see that, and ask Dan, because I've been on his case for now 3 years, right? It's at least 3. And ask Krista, because we didn't even have the bridges. So they did a full mental health study, and we should have Krista pull that back up so you can see that. It isn't at the depth that you guys work at, because I saw that video that you did. We need Christy Schmidt to come in here, who runs the child and adolescent facility, and say, this is what we're recommending for schools.
Well,
What schools are doing now are moving from the bridges into putting mental health professionals into their themselves.
Yeah. So I actually think that that's a really interesting analogy, Susan. So let's think about bridges, right? So we determined that there was a need and then engaged in a formal agreement with bridges. Did we have a formal agreement with them before we determined what it is that we wanted them to do, whether or not there was a need for it or anything like that? Because that's, to me, like, if that's the case, if we're like, yeah, bridges, here's our memorandum of understanding, here's our contract, and then we're going to spend the next year figuring out what we're going to do with you, that to me feels a little bit of an interesting process. And that to me feels more analogous to what we're talking about here, right?
Here's the analogy. We had people that were providing that service.
Sure, yeah, student services staff here.
In the district.
Yes.
So what Krista did is she evaluated whether or not, just like we would do this year, whether or not that was working and was a positive thing that was occurring.
Right.
And
but the question,
in the evaluation, the answer to that was, it's not enough.
Great. But the question I have is, did you have a formal agreement with Bridges while you were having that discussion? Because that's where I'm at. Like, I think it's great to have that discussion, but we need a formal agreement.
Yeah, that wasn't the question we were asking. Should we hire Bridges? The question we were asking is, do we provide sufficient mental health services to our students? And once they got there, then they decided what else they needed. So in this case, we're saying, are we providing sufficient safety to our students in the school setting using this structure? And we're going to study that and say yes or no. And then we can informatively make a good decision, like Krista did with Bridges.
All right, I am going to go ahead and see if I can do this correctly here. I'd like to hear.
Peter has his hand up, Andrew.
Who got the hand up now? Oh,
I do.
Peter?
Yeah.
Gee whiz, I'm trying to read. Okay, go ahead, Peter.
I'm sorry, Andrew. First of all, I want to say this is regardless of its shortcomings, and yeah, nothing's perfect. This is a much better agreement than the last one we had, and memorandum of understanding than the last one we had, specifically because it lays out this disciplinary process. What's the officer's role, what's the administrative role, and how they overlap and how they don't overlap, and what the assumptions are. It's a far better place than we were in the past. And yes, and I understand that when there might be some differences of opinion and some reservations, certainly there's some reservations, some of the things Eric talked about. It's a far better place than we were. The discrepancy, the deficiency that I note is that there's no specifications about training requirements for the SROs, and I think that that's something that we should certainly consider what the qualifications, other than just being a police officer, what are the qualifications that we want the person in that job to have? I think we need to go there. That's a concern that I have. The other thing is, and I want to make this comment about what I've heard about the SROs. Yes, I've heard a lot of feedback from different people, some of it very positive, and from some people, and unfortunately some things that give me concern. One of the things that I note is that for the positive feedback, I don't have any of it that's really related to this person's role as a police officer, as a law enforcement person, but just as a person in the building, help out here, build a relationship there, and so on. And it seems that all the positives I hear, is a police officer the right person to do it? Because when I hear the positives, they're not related to that person's qualifications as a police officer. They're related to that person's qualifications as a decent person who's in the building, who is there building relationships with the kids. Does that have to be a police officer? In terms of your comment about evaluating this as required, we shouldn't be spending any money ever on something that we don't evaluate. So having an evaluation going forward, I think, is important and something that we need to do. In terms of doing it for another year, right now this is the most disrupted year in the history of this district, and I understand the need for time to do an adequate evaluation. And so I think moving forward for another year agreement give us time without disrupting police departments, without disrupting the relationships that we already have and what we do rely on the SROs for, and give us time to do an evaluation. I think that that's a very reasonable approach, rather than throwing another wrench into the system right now and having people having to deal with different changes and another set of changes until we can really get an evaluation and make an informed decision about what we should do going forward. But we really have to make sure that we do that and we do get an informed decision going forward. So I'm inclined to support. I would not support a 3-year extension without evaluation, but I would, particularly because of the year. If this had been any other year, we could have spent a lot of time and had you spend a lot of time on this summer, but I wasn't even going to go. There's no reason for us to go there to even ask that right now. So I think it's reasonable that we don't have a good evaluation right now. We don't have a complete picture right now. But I'm hoping we get one over the year. I wouldn't support a 3-year agreement, but I would support maintaining this for another year to give us time, A, not just do any more disruption, and B, give us time to do a good evaluation going forward.
So I'm sorry, did anybody else was going to go?
No, I'm gonna make it. I want a motion. I want to make a motion right now. So I'm gonna let you go ahead and speak, Eric, and then we're gonna get this so we can get this going here.
Okay, I think it's important that I say this, and Andrew. So just to clarify, Dan, if someone makes a motion and this is approved, we're not approving the plan as written. We're just approving you to work on a plan, because I'm having some trouble understanding that.
Yeah. Yes. And That's exactly that. But you are authorizing me under the proposed motion to execute that when the plan is done, that, that I can sign off on it versus it coming back to the board. The rationale for that is the timeliness, piece of it.
So then can we submit to you some of our concerns with what this draft that we have, so that you make sure when you're negotiating the plan that those are included or at least being addressed, or we have questions answered for that?
Absolutely. The last thing I want to do is sign off on an agreement that the board doesn't support. So I absolutely want that feedback. Yes.
Okay.
And also, we're going to have an oversight committee.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So let me try to do this correctly here. I'd like to hear a motion to approve the recommendation for a one-year agreement at this time is to allow time to complete a thorough evaluation of the program before the board makes a permanent decision on the program, as all that is stated. Is that right?
Well,
Susan, straighten me out.
well, no, I don't know if it's straighten out, but I agree with Eric on some of the search and seizure concerns too. So I'm comfortable with a year and with us giving you more input on some of the things that we see. But I also agree with Peter. This is just so much better and outlines a lot of things in a very positive way. I would move to authorize the superintendent to, on behalf of the Monona Grove School District, enter into a memorandum of understanding regarding school resource officers with the Village of Cottage Grove and/or the City of Monona for the 2020-2021 school year.
That actually sounded better, Susan. Thanks.
Well, I just read what was written there. I didn't make that up.
Do we have I will second that if we have an understanding that the board, that agreement will come back to the board for discussion and input prior to it being signed.
Well, yeah, and that's not in there now. So if people want that, that would be, I'd be willing to amend. I mean, what Dan asked for was authorizing it with our giving him input, and then we'd be trusting him that he would do what we're saying. So if we do want it to come back, we would need to amend this motion to include that. To authorize him, because it says we're authorizing him to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the village and the city. So, and I was assuming, but didn't include language that we would give him input on it. If we wanted to add that language, it requires an amendment.
But you didn't even get to second it yet, so you can go ahead and start over.
Because he was seconding it based on that assumption. So yeah, we could.
I'm happy with Dan just saying yes, he intends to do that, and that satisfies me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I don't know what the timeline is for pulling this, together. If it does go quickly, that we have something before our next regular meeting, I'll make sure that there's a communication, or if we have to call a special meeting, I do agree that this is really important language. So yes, there absolutely will be a commitment there. There won't be any surprises for the board.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's the big one.
So did we need to amend, or did we?
No.
No, we were gonna let it go and trust Dan that he'll.
Okay.
He'll take
All right.
it.
I just wanted to be clear. Are we doing an oversight committee then?
Yes.
Sure. Okay.
I guess what I would say is we need to formalize that. So I'd like to come back at our next meeting with a plan for that for the board to approve. And I'd be glad to hear your thoughts about that, Lorraine, and so I can put that together.
Yeah, there'd have to be a clear charge for that committee and scope, and yeah, it would have to be board approved separately, but.
Well,
that's good.
Yep. Okay, so we had the first and the second. Any more discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor, Susan Manning. Susan Fox.
Aye.
Lorraine.
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Nay.
Peter.
Aye.
Eric.
Aye.
Andrew. Aye. Ayes have it, motion carries.
Okay, so real briefly, before we move on to the next item, if any board members have individual input about specific things in the agreement or the MOU, please email me, not the entire board, but with your thoughts. And then likewise thoughts about the oversight committee as well, or phone conversation so we can put that plan together as well.
Okay. Susan Manning.
I asked Dan just one quick question too. And then Dan, the other place where we could work on this is in policy committee, right? Didn't you suggest that before?
Yeah, I think if that is absolutely another possibility, is that besides an MOU is to actually have board policy on this is another option. Sure.
And that I think, Elizabeth, would give you a really nice avenue to be able to.
For my thoughts and feelings, Susan.
How it works.
Are you looking for an avenue for my thoughts and feelings?
Well, again, no, and again, for your expertise on this, and being able to put together a good policy that.
Yeah, I'm just teasing you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I think we should evaluate it first and then work on writing the policy.
Sure, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we're ready to dive into policy.
I totally agree. And again, we can take pieces from the committee and maybe they can write a charge and it'll work.
Right. All right, let's move to number 4, district equity statement.
So the Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee created over the end of last year Monona Grove Statement on Equity, and that reads as students in Monona Grove School District have experienced significant measurable system-wide inequities in achievement due to interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism and biases. We recognize our historic failure and seek to address how race, language, religion, income, and ability statuses, country of origin, sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation, and their intersectionality impacts educational outcomes. The Monona Grove School District commits to the disruption of societal and historical inequities and elimination of disparities. The Monona Grove School District believes strongly in the value of diversity, inclusion, equity, and justice. The Monona Grove School District commits to maximizing the educational outcomes for each and every student. That's the statement that we came up of, and that's the statement that the committee is presenting to the board for approval.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. So Eric, did you want to, I was going to say, did you want to make that motion for approval?
Before we do, can I just do just a couple grammatical thing? The very last 2 sentences, Monona School District, the D should be capitalized, and this last sentence, the way you read it, Eric, you read Monona Grove School District, and I think it probably should say that. So I'd change it to Monona Grove School District capitalized again. That's all. And the committee, I would just add, the committee spent a lot of time on the exact wording, and there were some real strong feelings and thoughts behind each of these words and each of these things that were listed. So I feel like it's reflective of certainly of the committee's work.
Okay. Peter?
What is it? I understand and I agree entirely with the sentiments presented, but what does this statement do? What part of the role of governance does it play? It's not policy. It's not, it's not in going to the handbook. I don't, what is it? And on that basis, I don't know whether or not I can approve it, other than just we're making a statement. We're not making it to anybody or from anybody. Does this have a place in policy, for example?
Well,
otherwise, what is this?
I just want to say that did come up in the committee. Does this have teeth? How are you going to make sure that is it something that can be implemented? And we did discuss that. I don't know, Dan, if you want to elaborate a little bit on, what value the statement has and how will it be followed and how will we make sure that this is going to be a part of our district and a focus of the district?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started this work, that was the initial thought, was to develop an equity policy. And as we went through it, we kind of came to the understanding or realization that a policy needs to be more than a statement, but really, really provide direction and even, you know, more than just direction, but so to speak, you know, things that we need to follow. And so this, I would say the equity statement is very much akin to a mission statement. So that it's a statement that we're making. So very similar to our strategic plan. The strategic plan is not in policy, but that does drive the work that we do. And so moving forward, the next time we renew the strategic plan, as we look to update our mission and vision statement, this equity statement should be hand in hand with those or incorporated into them.
And that was also at the training that some of us went to well over a year ago with Percy Brown and Rainey Briggs and the WSB. It was a WSB thing. WSB has a very good equity statement, which I didn't even know they had till they brought it out at that meeting. And they made the point that before you work on policy, you need a statement. That should be your first step, is to come up with a statement that reflects your beliefs and goals, like a mission vision, and then you move to the policy. So it should be you know, a lens that we consider with all the decisions we make. It should be posted on our website. I mean, it should be readily available that this is what we believe and this is what we stand for. That was the point of it.
Go ahead,
I guess my comment on that would be that, you know, statements posted on our website have no formal role in the governance of the school district. If we want to say, well, we'll put it in the strategic plan when it comes around again, that's fine, and that's maybe an appropriate place for it, appropriate place to put it. But I think it shoves it to the side if we just make a statement and put it on our post it on our website. It doesn't have sort of any force in terms of the governance.
Oh, that was not.
Wait a minute. What I would suggest, if I may finish my statement, Susan, what I would suggest is that we have, we have this bullying policy that we worked on for a long time, and it has a strong statement about bullying. And I can draw a lot of parallels actually between the statement there and the statement and this current equity statement. And what I would suggest is that we find a way to work this into a policy statement and put it in our board policies, because I believe that is where it belongs, rather than just a statement posted on the website, which has no formal role in the governance of the district.
Susan Manning.
Well, Peter, that's a good statement. So actually, I watched the Teaching, Learning, and Equity Committee, and what actually happened was they worked their hearts out on trying to put a policy together, but it was the group just seemed to be a little bit too diverse in terms of they needed a better place to start where they could unite. And this is where they came together. And so as a policy committee, we were waiting for the policy. So now that we have some direction, the committee can either start to go forward. This is the opening statement to a policy. You're exactly right. This is what it is. But it took them a long time to get here. So thank them very much for the work they've done on this. This gives us the way to begin on the policy. And it gives us the ideas that committee in their meetings is bringing to us on policy to do that work. So I think this is a great beginning to where we want to be.
That's fine. If we want to, and that's what I would recommend, is that we send this to the policy committee and have you develop a policy out of it. And to be honest, all we have to do to make this a policy is do exactly what we did with bullying, which is put a line on the end which says the superintendent will develop administrative guidelines and procedures for the implementation of this policy. We do that, suddenly it's a policy.
And I don't know if this helps, Peter, but I actually personally wrote the bullying policy and brought that to the board because there was a statute that required it. Mm-hmm. And recently in the non-discrimination and the policy committee study on Title IX, I think we're starting to have some very low level of experience in trying to put that language together. So again, I think you're kind of helping us to find the road that we need to follow on that issue. But that's exactly what happened with us on bullying. Is the law said you have to have one, and these are the 10 things that have to be in it. And we might be able to use some of the patterns from Title IX on putting that together.
Susan Fox.
Well, yeah, obviously I wasn't clear on what I said, because that was the statement I made, that the whole idea of this was, this is an initial statement, which is to guide our policy. And the equity policy will be about a lot more than bullying. I mean, bullying is just like a little thing. This is talking about curriculum development, materials that you use, hiring practices. This is the lens through which we look at a whole lot that goes on in our district. So it's very much a piece of governance, but it was just regarded as the first step in developing a bigger policy. And that policy will encompass more than simply bullying, which is one negative thing that we need to deal with. I mean, our bullying policy already addresses some of these things. We should go
I
back.
didn't say this was just about bullying. I didn't say it was equivalent to our bullying.
I understand that. I
policy.
just want to
I'm
make
sorry.
it really clear, because you brought up what does it have to do with governance. We should do a policy. And I said, exactly. That was always our intention. This is simply the very first step. And we all sat around at those of us who went to that conference and talked about it and said, well, yeah, we've been talking about a policy. And the point that was made that night was, before you do a policy, you need to have a statement about what is it you want to accomplish with that policy. That's what this is. So it simply is step one. That's it. And yeah, posting on the website, no, that's nothing. That just shows what we believe, and we can point to it. When we make a decision, for example, like eliminating honors classes, why are we doing that? Because we want to increase access. We want to level up our curriculum for everybody and increase access to AP classes, et cetera, for everybody, increase the rigor for everybody. Why do we want to do that? Because we believe in this. I think that's how it ties in to more. So anyway.
Elizabeth and then Lorraine.
I just have a question about the statement itself, Eric. So I really like a lot of the really direct language in it. I feel like something that, I don't know, it's like strikes me as missing, I guess. I was curious about if this came up in your conversations while you were working on this, is like language around like the rich value that our voices of our students that are on the margins, right? So our students with disabilities, or students of color, or students who identify LGBTQ, like the equity isn't just about the discrimination, but also like ensuring that we're making space so that like their voices are bringing this kind of rich value to our community. And I know that there's a nod in here around believing in the value of diversity, inclusion, and justice, but I'm just kind of curious if there is room here for stronger language on like that more asset-based or like positive-based aspect of like what it is to have like an equity mission. And I just didn't know if that came up in your discussions or not.
Some of that came up, and we did decide to say ability statuses rather than students with disabilities. So that was part of the discussion there. And I think it was focusing on their abilities, not their disabilities. But so that's to that, question, that's where that piece came in. To the other things, we did touch on them, and I if I look back at the draft statements, it's quite a bit longer, and it's been reduced, and then it was longer, and it's been reduced again. So I think we've went back and forth to try to be as concise and direct as possible. I mean, there's certainly always improvements that can be made, especially from different perspectives and what you say. But yes, I would say we definitely discussed those things, and this is what we ended up with in the end. So
great, thank you.
All right, Lorraine.
So Peter, I agree with you. I would like to see this as a policy as well. And so I guess my question is for the policy committee, knowing that this is a pressing issue, would this be on the forefront of developing a policy for this?
It has been. Actually, that's a great question, Lorraine. Put it right out there. Make sure it's in the minutes. Again, we have tried to be respectful of the committee, and as they worked through the statement, I think they felt more comfortable. We were kind of sitting waiting for a policy. So once the committee gives us direction, and I think Susan can speak to that because she's on both the committees and can kind of interface with those two things. What do you think, Susan? We would move.
I don't think we ever settled the question of where the policy was going to start because originally, I mean, the intention at one point of the Teaching Learning Equity Committee was to possibly come back and work on a policy, I thought. And then it would go to the policy committee, but it could start the other way. So I don't know, maybe if the board wants to direct it, or if Eric and Dan, if you want to have a conversation later and figure it out. There was definitely a commitment that there would be a policy, though. That's where all this started. And so the question is simply, where's the best place to start the development of a policy? And maybe it is the policy committee, and then it could go from there to the Teaching Learning Equity Committee before it comes to the board. We talked about that too. So whatever you guys think, I don't know. That's the best way to do it.
If you don't mind, yeah, I just got a thought about that. So one of the things that we talked about a little bit, and one of the things I learned in talking to some other school districts who have been through this process is that they recommended you do it very much like developing a strategic plan, that even though it's a policy, that you have community and other stakeholders and community members, other stakeholders involved in writing, or at least what are the key components of the policy, as opposed to only working on it as a board, because it is such an all-encompassing. So almost like when you develop a strategic plan where you have other people involved. So that's one way of doing it. We certainly can write it ourselves. So I do think if you approve this tonight, that absolutely is our next step, is to talk about what is the process for developing that policy. There's a couple different ways that we could do it.
Well, and Dan, wasn't it, my memory was, and that's how we kind of backed off a little bit to see how the committee wanted to move forward. Wasn't it Percy Brown that looked us right in the eye and he said, the very first thing you need is because you can't move forward without that statement. So you have to do that. So it's part one.
So I would say that would be a topic of discussion very soon with this board, to start talking about what that process, might look like. So I've got some ideas. Obviously, the board needs to, work together on that. So
in that case, what I would, if that's coming up soon, if we're anticipating moving forward in that, what I would suggest is that what we do as a board is that we make a motion for inclusion of this statement in the development of our next strategic plan. I like that because putting it in the strategic plan means something that we have an obligation to work on and work to. It becomes a document, working document, a living thing that we build around.
So Peter, why would we do that rather than integrate it into our mission statement, so that it's involved in every single decision that we as a board make?
Well,
in the strategic plan, it's just part of a plan.
It's not. It's because it's not written in. It's not written in the form of a mission statement. And number one, and number two, strategic plan is what you work on, and this is something we have to work on. And so putting it in the strategic plan, I think, is the appropriate place, because then it gives us direction on what it is and how we work on the strategic plan, what we do with the strategic plan. I just want us to see this have more weight, have real weight, have a real place in the governance of the district, rather than just a statement, which it's so easy for those to turn into lip service. So to be in governance of this district, it needs to be in policy, or it needs to be in the strategic plan. I haven't thought about the mission statement, but it's just not written that way. But I'd be happy either place. But I think that we should go beyond. We can approve this just fine. But what we should recommend is that we should approve this, recommend it to policy, to write policy, or recommend that make a motion that we include this in our next strategic plan.
So why don't we approve it tonight, and why don't we then, Eric, Susan, Dan, myself, Elizabeth, sit down and Andrew, Lorraine, the board, and say,
because that's a quorum. What you just described as a quorum, you can't do that.
How about, this might be easier. We could recommend approval of the statement as presented to be included in a future policy and in our upcoming strategic plan, something like that. I mean,
Yeah,
You know,
that's fine. That's great.
I would rather
that
just,
was-
I,
that
you
was
know,
absolutely the intention of this statement. So if we want to add that to the approval, I'm okay with that. I mean, that was
I don't. I just
You're-
want to make a motion to approve the equity statement as written. If you want to vote against it, then you can vote against it. I can't
That
believe
sounds
that
good. Go-
we're
why don't
having
you
this
go
much
for it?
discussion on a statement like this. We could always work to make it a policy and to improve it, but we're actually discussing not having a statement on equity at this point, which
No.
I
Correct.
can't, I can't
No.
comprehend. But if you want to vote against it, then I would say vote against it. So Andrew, with that, I'll make the motion right now to approve the equity statement that I read as written.
I'll second that. Oh, rats. It's
I'm
cute.
with
That's
Eric.
when you fight for that second. Don't you love it? You can have it, Elizabeth.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor, Susan Manning,
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Aye.
Lorraine,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Andrew, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. All right, moving to discussion items. First is the policy revisions, the first reading.
Want me to start it? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So only three policies, but the first one is very large and comprehensive policy. So there are two attachments below the policy that from Neola that explain the rationale on the Title IX policy. So if you haven't had a chance to read those, please, I think it would be beneficial to do so. This is a very long policy, and so you may or may not have had a chance to read through prior to tonight. But understand that Nicole has really helped lead the writing of this. She has gone through training as far as what the federal requirements are for schools in Title IX. And then our policy committee has gone through line by line on each one of the things that are option and discuss those. And so again, it's the first reading only. But we could, if you have questions tonight, we certainly can discuss it. But otherwise, if you haven't had a chance to review, please do, and make sure that if there's anything in there that you're, have questions about, let's get them on the floor so we can answer them. But basically, the long short of it is, it's required by the federal government to have such a policy.
And if you're really interested, there is a WSB taped presentation on this that reviews it kind of line by line. Basically what happened is they made these changes in the law. And when they make the changes in law, we have to implement them into policy. And that's effectively what Nicole did for us. And then we line by line reviewed that against the federal law and the memos. And even you consulted legal counsel on this. And this was due August 14th. So we really needed to have this for first read tonight, no matter what.
Okay. So I would say if there aren't questions tonight and you read through and you have questions, if it's just a clarification, you could reach out to myself or Nicole or one of the committee members. If there's some things that you really would think the board needs to discuss, bring those to our attention as well so that we can, the policy committee will be meeting again between now and the next regular board meeting. So I think we chose a date. We'll get that published so everyone knows. So it would be helpful if there's some things you want the committee to consider, to be able to address it, before they meet again as well.
Yeah, if you guys could, I think our meeting is the 24th. If you have just even general questions about this and need more information, just send us a note and we'll try and get that to you. And if you have specific changes you want to make, if you could put those in writing and get those to us by the 24th. Again, these are legal issues, so it may be that we want to change the language because we don't like the way the language reads. And in this case, the law isn't giving us a lot of choices. The other thing that's really interesting about this particular policy is it was meant to empower specific people in a particular way. And if this policy doesn't fit the circumstances, we have another one that allows you to file a complaint for effectively the same problems or concerns that is more general, and you can still file a complaint. Right, Nicole? That would be.
That's correct.
Is that how you would put that? That we have a backup policy that if your facts don't fit into this one, into this section, this policy, there is another policy that allows you to bring that complaint forward.
Yes,
In
there
another
is.
area.
It's governed by state law.
Yeah.
Okay, should we move on to the next one? Okay, the next one, there is an important change being recommended in the open enrollment policy. Our current policy, so most of these changes are just procedural to basically rewrite and bring us up, the policy up to date with what the current statutes say and what our current practice is. But there is one substantive change, and that is item under space availability, item A, subparagraph 2, or actually the lettering's a little bit off here, and that is with regard to siblings. Our current policy states that siblings who apply, students who apply for open enrollment, if their sibling is already attending, they get preference, but they are not guaranteed a seat. What we're recommending is that starting next year, where space will not be an issue any longer, that siblings are automatically accepted into the district if they meet the criteria. And so that's a major change. We look back historically, I think we determined it impacts less than 10 students a year. But it's really the idea of trying to, keep families or students in the same family, together.
Any questions or concerns with that one? Okay. Dan, you want to talk about the last one?
Okay, yeah, last one's very short. It's our policy on administration of medication, and they're now with the CBD products as well as essential oils. Our policy was silent on whether or not students or staff were allowed to bring those things into the school buildings. We did have our student services team with our school nurses review this policy. We had a couple different options about, those things being completely banned versus they can, subject to approval. So the recommended language in those two statements are pretty self-explanatory, that with regard to the CBD products and essential oils. It has not been an issue that we're aware of, but the fact that it is maybe in some schools, we thought it'd be good to put into policy.
All right. Any questions or concerns? Okay. Hearing none, I'll just move to the next item. School renovations and construction update.
Okay, so remember at the last meeting you had Peter Sandin from Findorf here to give you a kind of a detailed update. So since that time, there is an executive summary attached, just again, a little bit of progress, each week moving forward. So nothing, significant. So I guess the other thing I'd like to mention is, I think you were, we had through email correspondence, reached out about some dates about tours, for the board members of the new school, as well as the renovation projects at Winnequa and Glacial Drellman. So we do have a couple dates that we've picked. I would say that those are really at this point the only dates that appear to work for our team. The time, definitely we can adjust if that's too early for some of you, but we're proposing 4 o'clock on those dates, where on the September 30th is just tour of Winnequa School, and then on the October 7th, the new school, Granite Ridge, as well as Glacial Drellman. So if 4 o'clock works for everyone, that would be great. If you need to move it back to 4:30 or 5, we could do that. We were reminded as we get into October, the days are going to get shorter. And so, I didn't check and see what the exact sunset is on those dates, but it will be getting darker earlier. So does anyone have a concern with either those times or dates?
What was the other date, Dan? September 30th
And October 7th.
Thank you. And for the record, 6:39 p.m. is the projected sunset time on
okay,
September
thank you.
30th. So we should be good.
Perfect.
What were the times again, Dan? Sorry.
About 4 o'clock on each of those dates,
The 30th and
and the 7th.
okay.
All right, we'll certainly, Joyce will communicate and confirm those for you. But okay, and then, so yeah, we're excited to be able to have you walk through. And by that time, by October 7th, we think there'll be a pretty good shell of the building up that you'll be able to walk through the entire part. So, okay, otherwise, that's all I have, unless you have any questions.
All right, seeing no questions, moving to our future meeting dates.
We have the annual meeting next Monday. If you recall, you took action at the last meeting, and the action was to have it at the auditorium or the stadium as appropriate. We are recommending the auditorium, or that's, I guess, how we're noticing it. The rationale was 2 reasons. The primary one was the audio visual, that we are going to be, on my superintendent's report, given a report regarding information about the referendum. We'll be live streaming, and just for the folks who will be live streaming for us, just with the equipment and so on, it would be easier in the auditorium. We don't expect a large crowd, and then we don't have to worry about weather. So that was the rationale for choosing that location.
Peter?
Is there a mailing going out as we've done in the past?
We haven't done a mailing actually for a few years.
Wow, but we've moved this a fair amount. So I'm just wondering, yeah.
Yeah. So I think we communicate, through other, electronically and.
Right. Is this notice in the paper? Is that part of what happens, or I don't remember? Just remind me.
Yeah, Jared, I think there's a legal notice required.
Yep, there's a legal notice for the meeting notice along with the budget that's published. It's actually has to run two Wednesdays or Thursdays before the annual meeting. So it's actually been these last 2 weeks before Monday night.
Okay. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
Oh, Dan, do you want to add the personnel committee meeting the policy committee meeting? It's the 23rd.
Yep, looks like Joyce added it already.
Perfect. Got it.
Andrew, did you want to ask about, or did you, when I disappeared briefly, about?
I want to keep the board members after we adjourn, just a minute.
Got it. Okay.
We got to get off of recording.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, starting with Susan Manning.
Aye.
Lorraine.
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Eric.
Aye.
Susan Fox.
Aye.
Andrew McKinney, aye. Ayes have it, motion carries. We are adjourned. Let's wait till,
Andrew, you will not, I can stop the recording, but you are live streamed. I don't have control of that. So your
Oh.
discussion will be on your stream.
no.
What's, I'm sorry, what's at issue here?
It's about the evaluation. I had dropped the ball last week, and we should have had a closed session. But I think that we had all the agreement of what we needed. It was just a couple of things needed to be added. And so I don't know if we needed a closed session, just needed to add a couple of comments on the evaluation. And then once it looks like it's all done, because we already made the decision on
Thank you so much for coming.
all 6 of the parts of the evaluation of the performance. And then I can just go ahead and explain to Dan and get that taken care of. If anybody has
Andrew,
something.
what we usually do is we finish the evaluation, and if there's consensus that it's done and we don't need any more additions and it's done, then as a board, we meet with Dan and go through it so that we can all interface with him on the evaluation. It's not just the board president, it's the whole board. And that does require a closed session.
In this case, as I recall, the question wasn't about adding anything. It was about, there were a couple comments there that we weren't sure we want to leave in. That was.
Okay.
Right.
But
So
what
we
we
just-
could do, just as a suggestion, what we could do is schedule a meeting at a closed session at the next meeting, and we could meet briefly as a board and then bring Dan in, because I don't think it would take long. And we could either decide to strike those or not, because that's always part of the discussion. So we could do it in one meeting. It would be easier.
Yeah.
Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just have to find a meeting date.
Well,
Yeah.
or it could just be, I mean, it's a long time, but it could be closed session before the October meeting.
Sure. Okay, we'll do that.
Does that sound okay? I mean, I know we're late.
That's fine.
It's a weird year,
Okay.
2020.
All righty. Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks. See ya.
Time is
All right.
sleepy time.
Good night.
Bye, everybody. Good night.
Yeah.
Good night.
Nice to see you in person someday.
We
Soon.
didn't break any records tonight.